Thank you. Good afternoon. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. At least 6 people have died and dozens of others have been rescued after a tourist submarine sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt. It's being reported the submarine, called Sinbad, was carrying 45 passengers, including children, who were all Russian nationals. The group had paid for a sea trip to the coral reefs in Hurghada. That's according to local media reports. Back in the UK, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has defended her handling of the economy after she announced welfare cuts and squeezed Whitehall budgets in her spring statement yesterday. Labour is bracing for backlash amid concerns about some 3 million families on incapacity benefits expected to be hit by the changes. Meanwhile, the OBR has halved its forecast for growth. The Chancellor's announcement will leave lower-income households £500 a year poorer over the next 5 years as a result of her statement. That's according to the Resolution Foundation think tank. But speaking to GB News this morning, she said she is not complacent about the challenges families are facing.
Our forecast yesterday shows that the real household disposable income per person will be £500 greater at the end of the Parliament compared with the plans that I inherited. And obviously the last Parliament was the worst on record for living standards, and the OBR confirmed yesterday that real household disposable income will increase in every year of this Parliament. I recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite. I'm not complacent about the challenges that families face with their finance.
Meanwhile, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride has hit out at the Labour government, accusing them of killing growth.
This is a government, of course, that has created its own mess by taxing and spending and borrowing and killing growth and being anti-business and talking down the economy and loading us up on debt and interest payments on that debt such that they blew all their headroom. That's what socialist governments do, I'm afraid. No, this is a mess entirely they're making.
Meanwhile, after the Chancellor's update on the economy, US President Donald Trump announced 25% tariffs on all cars not made in the United States. Speaking from the Oval Office, the President said the move could generate more than $100 billion in new annual revenue. Mr. Trump said the tariffs will come into effect on the 2nd of April.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. We start off with a 2.5% base, which is what we were at.
Rachel Reeves has assured the government is engaged in extensive discussions with the US about what tariffs will mean for the UK. Meanwhile, Canada and Japan have threatened retaliatory action. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba said Tokyo was considering all kinds of countermeasures. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called it a direct attack and threatened retaliatory tariffs. In other news, Sir Keir Starmer will accuse Vladimir Putin of hollow promises in ceasefire talks as he co-hosts the Coalition of the Willing summit alongside President Macron in Paris today. The Prime Minister will present the outcomes of this week's planning meetings in support of Ukraine. Officials and defence chiefs have been holding talks at London's Northwood military headquarters, drawing up a strategy to support Kyiv and deter future aggression from Moscow. Some breaking news. Thousands of jobs are at risk as British Steel consults unions over possible closure. Britain's second biggest steel producer is kicking off a consultation that could lead to the closure of its 2 blast furnaces and more than half of its workforce losing their jobs. The move will put pressure on the government to improve an offer of taxpayer aid to the company. Unions are calling on the government to help secure the company's future. Community, the GMB and Unite said it was devastating news that British Steel's Chinese owner is launching a consultation on closing the blast furnaces at Scunthorpe Steelworks this June, or at a later date if an agreement with the government can be reached. Scunthorpe Steelworks employs thousands of workers directly and through supply chains throughout the UK. And Just Stop Oil say they're giving up protesting because their demands have been met. In an email to supporters, the environmental campaigners claim initial demand to end new oil and gas is now government policy, making us one of the most successful civil resistance campaigns in recent history. We've kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and the courts have ruled new oil and gas licences unlawful. It means no more throwing soup on paintings and slow marching in streets, but there will be one last action on the 26th of April on Parliament Square. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past midday. Now, in just a moment, we'll bring you the very latest on the news that at least 6 people have died and dozens others have been rescued after a tourist submarine sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt.
But just before we get the latest on that story, we're going to head to Paris because this hour the Prime Minister is due to give a press conference. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has travelled to the French capital. Christopher, tell us, what's on the agenda then?
Hi Tom, hi Emily, that's right. Well, here in Paris, Sir Keir Starmer has been meeting with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and also Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, along with 28 other European leaders, members of the so-called Coalition of the Willing. What's on the agenda here is establishing some form of momentum in the peace talks, the ceasefire talks with the war with Russia in Ukraine. They're looking at military aid to Ukraine, the prospect for a ceasefire. Currently, they've been talking, hopefully, about some kind of ceasefire on the Black Sea. That hasn't happened yet fully. Russia, of course, is talking to the US in Riyadh. Ukraine and the rest of us are watching on. And the reassurance force, maybe British boots on the ground, led by UK forces and French forces, that would ensure a peace is kept, but only if, of course, Donald Trump ensures we have military cover from the air, radar and military fast jet support. We need that to make sure that we don't put any of our troops at risk against battling with Russia. Lots of things at stake. I know it's a big day in Westminster, of course, with the fallout of the spring statement and the issues with steelmaking in the northeast of England. But the big stuff is here in Paris, where by the end of this year we could see British troops being deployed in Ukraine to hold a peace. And it's very important that ceasefire deal is agreed in the right way. So far, though, Putin is not playing ball. That's what the PM has told us. He's not a serious player in the peace talks, we're told by Downing Street. Vladimir Putin needs to show he's willing to play ball and start talking about a peace deal. But so far, nothing has happened. This is the third major meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. The problem that Keir Starmer's got, unless there's momentum towards a ceasefire deal or a peace deal, then this kind of conversation today starts to look pretty soon redundant.
The body language between the two, between Keir Starmer and President Macron, very cosy indeed, very touchy-feely, very close, as if they've been best friends for years. It almost seemed romantic. Did you notice that?
I was last here in Paris with Keir Starmer when he was the leader of the opposition back in October 2003, and that was the first meeting. I think Starmer gave Macron an Arsenal shirt with Macron on the back, as you might expect, being an Arsenal fan, Keir Starmer. They do get on well, and they are trying to pull together a reluctant Europe to get behind Ukraine. Of course, the world has changed, as we heard from Rachel Reeves. What she didn't say, of course, was the world has changed by Donald Trump since he became leader in January. And I think in 6 to 8 weeks since then, you've seen Europe get behind and try and support Ukraine. But I don't think yet the case is made for British troops on the ground. One issue I'm always pressing with John Healey, the Defence Secretary. I think GBNews viewers and listeners want to hear more about why we need to deploy UK troops in Ukraine when so many cutbacks are hitting our viewers and listeners and voters back in the UK. That case is yet to be made. I expect that to be made in the next final 6 months of this year.
OK, Chris, we'll catch up with you, of course, at that press conference with the Prime Minister not long to go now. But thanks indeed for joining us live from Paris.
Bit of an unnecessary sort of lingering hand on the back of
they all do. This is the modern thing.
Isn't it?
This is what the politicians do now. I mean, the way that Starmer was behaving towards Trump, you'd think he was petting him.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it? I don't know.
Well, we're going to move on now.
Apparently.
Some breaking news that has come into us in the last hour. At least 6 people have died and dozens others have been rescued after a tourist submarine sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt.
Yes, the submarine, called Sindbad, was reportedly carrying 45 passengers, including some children, on a sea trip in the coral reefs.
Well, joining us now is our national reporter, Charlie Peters, who has the very latest. Charlie, do we know anything about those on board?
They all seem to be Russian. That's according to the Russian embassy in Cairo, publishing on its Facebook page this afternoon that around 10 a.m. local time, which is just over 4 hours now, this vessel, which you're seeing on your screens, sunk off the coast about 1 kilometre away from Hurghada, which is a very popular coastal city tourist destination. And it's claimed that 45 people were involved. The consulate in the Red Sea area saying that all of the people on board were Russian nationals, and the Russian embassy is saying that some of their diplomatic staff are at the coast assisting with people there. 29 people rescued there, it says, so many more people still to be accounted for in those figures. At the moment, they just don't add up. The Russian embassy is saying that 4 people have died, but we're also hearing from local newspaper reports that 6 deaths have been reported at this stage. So we're still waiting for some clarification on that situation. But the Russian embassy is claiming that all people on board that vessel, including the children, were Russian nationals. No local or regional reports to confirm that. And the Red Sea in general and the Egyptian side in particular are very popular with Russian and Ukrainian tourists. They account for about 40% of the local tourism. In fact, there were astonishing scenes a few years ago at the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine when both Ukrainian and Russian nationals were stranded in hotels together, not being able to return home. It's only recently that Russian tourists have returned to Egypt due to some restrictions on travel. And it appears that a major tragedy has struck many Russian tourists off the coast of Hurghada in the Red Sea.
Okay. Very interesting. Yes, just reading, in 2023, over 1.4 million tourists from Russia apparently visited Egypt, and Egypt's looking to attract more.
Yeah, and this is quite a popular way of looking under the sea. I mean, you don't have to don a scuba suit. You don't have to worry about the safety implications for that. A lot of people will think this is the safe way to look at the fish. And yet, clearly, in this instance, absolutely not.
Yeah, I was in Jordan last month. I actually walked past one of these vessels in the Gulf of Aqaba, which is about 100 kilometres north of this site. And I have to say, walking past that vessel, I would not have been confident getting on it. I mean, there are 2 vessels like this by the Sinbad company. They've not had, as far as I can tell, any major reports of incidents in the past, but they're not the level of seaworthy vessels you might anticipate with the sort of submarine expeditions. As far as I'm concerned, I would only get on a submarine if it had HMS on the front of it.
Well, we're just going to have a look at exactly where this is. Of course, Egypt on the left there, the Red Sea on the right, and this submarine tragedy there, very close to the coast.
Yeah, just 1 kilometre off the coast, Tom, is what we've been told by the Russian embassy in Cairo, with its diplomatic staff there. And from that position, you can see several other nations, Jordan up to the northeast, Israel further north, and Saudi Arabia across the coast. So it's a busy shipping lane as well in the Red Sea. Very clear water that you're referring to, very popular with divers, and that's why these submarines are flocked to by tourists so often.
Also popular with United States security signal group chats at this moment in time, but that's perhaps a story for another day. Charlie Peters, thanks indeed for joining us.
OK, well, shall we discuss this further with oceanographer Dr. Simon Boxall? Dr. Simon, thank you very much. How might this have happened? These submarines clearly are used quite a lot for these types of trips into the water, as we've discussed, to see the fish and everything, the corals. Why might it have sunk in this occasion?
There are about 14 of these sort of tourist submarines around the world, and they've had a very good safety record to date. We don't know what's happened yet. All we know at the moment is that it was just leaving port, whether they hadn't got around to securing the hatches at this stage. The vessel itself is rated to 25 metres depth, and that's the limit it goes to. Let me rephrase that. It's rated to 75 metres safety depth, but it's designed to go to 25 metres for sort of normal tourist purposes. So it would have been well within its sort of depth range. If you look at their website, they claim that this boat was engineered, in inverted commas, in Finland, Finland. It doesn't say it was built in Finland. I think it was built in Finland to have a lot of faith in it. The Finnish are renowned for their boat building. So we don't know exactly what its true history is. But as I said, this is one of 2 boats that Sinbad operate out of Egypt. It's very popular. It's not uncommon that you'd have all with the same nationality on board. Quite often they prefer, it seems, if you look at their website, to have groups working together rather than sort of individuals joining the ship as sort of 2 or 3 people here or there. So, the chances are you've got a party of Russians, who knows where they came from, joining the vessel. We don't have enough information yet to know why it capsized or why it sank. We don't know even if it has sank or whether it's at the surface. They claim to have very good safety mechanisms on board. They've got oxygen masks that will drop down a bit like an aircraft, as well as having life jackets under the seat. We do know that the majority of people, it seems, have survived, but we don't know the exact death toll at this stage. But it is a tragedy. People on holiday looking forward to a fantastic time, looking at this wonderful coral reef, and it ends in this way.
Yeah, it just sounds like the most awful tragedy experience for these people. Dr. Simon Boxall, thank you very much indeed for your expertise. You're an oceanographer. Fantastic to have you. We'll bring you any updates as and when we get them on who was on board and how it might have happened.
Absolutely. But, of course, there's much more to discuss today. Indeed, Labour MPs have been accusing the Chancellor of making devastating and unacceptable welfare cuts announced in her spring statement yesterday.
Yes, this comes after the government's own analysis showed the cuts would leave more than 3 million households worse off and push 250,000 people into poverty.
Well, the Nottingham East MP, Nadia Whittome, is one of those criticising the party's welfare cuts. Let's take a listen.
People will feel that this is a continuation of austerity for them if they are one of the upwards of 400,000 people who are going to lose thousands of pounds a year as a result of these cuts. That has a human impact.
But Rachel Reeves, she stands by her announcement, but told GBNews she wishes she could go further.
Am I satisfied with the numbers? No, of course I'm not. I want to go further and faster to grow the economy.
Well, joining us now is the former Labour MP Steve McCabe. Steve, it does seem that we've got a bit of strange party cross-dressing going on now. The Labour Treasury is saying we're going to cut these benefits, and they're being criticised seemingly from across the political spectrum.
Well, what Labour are doing are trying to cut the number of people who are unemployed and who are claiming health-related benefits who may well be capable with the right support of finding work.
Steve, do you think they're going about it in the right way? Because we can't ignore the hundreds. I think there's 100 charities who work with disabled people saying that this is going to push people into poverty. I mean, if 250,000 people are pushed into poverty off the back of these cuts, that's going to be an awful legacy for Labour.
Well, of course, that assumes that these people remain in a static position, that nothing changes, that they simply remain on benefit. But obviously, if they get a job, I mean, there's £1.4 billion being put into job-related support, the very thing the same charities have been asking for years. And what we have to the question that's got to be asked is simple. How come Britain is one of the very few countries where the number of people claiming health-related benefits has gone up since the end of the pandemic rather than come down?
I mean, it's a very sensible question to be asking, Steve. And I suppose on the other side of things, there will be people asking, hang on, this is a ballooning expenditure from the government. I mean, we spend more on disability benefits than we do on national defence. These cuts, 4.8 billion in the round, but if we take the 1.4 billion extra being spent on employment support, that means that's only 3.4 billion pounds of cuts to the disability benefit budget. I mean, as a percentage of that budget, it's not very much. I mean, surely, if anything, more could have been found, more cuts could have been made.
Well, you've got to start somewhere. I mean, the reality is it's been going up and up and up. I spent years on the Works and Pensions Select Committee looking at this problem. The government now are trying to do something about it. The previous government didn't do anything about it, and you have to start somewhere. But
the previous government would contend with that because Mel Stride, who is of course now the Shadow Chancellor, was the Work and Pensions Secretary. He has been trumpeting around this plan that he said was being put in place but got disrupted by the calling of the election.
Well, of course, they were in power for 14 years, and what we saw was a steady escalation of the problem. It is perfectly possible that Mel Stride was trying to come up with a plan, but he didn't have a plan and they weren't doing anything about it. And I simply come back to the problem. There are people who could be helped into work who are not being helped. They're being left to vegetate on benefits, which is not good for them in the long run. It's not good for our economy. There's about 4 million people not working who could be working.
Yeah, I think there's
and
a problem,
course,
though, for those
1 in 8 young people.
I mean, Steve, those are awful statistics, and I think all of us want those to change in a positive way. But there are a lot of people on PIP, the personal independence payments, who may well be working at the same time, who may well lose their allowance entirely because they don't score this 4 points in a particular area, who are very, very anxious indeed, Steve. You must admit that.
Yeah, look, I can understand why people are anxious, and I don't want anyone who genuinely is incapable of working to lose out. And I haven't heard the government say that's their intention at all. But I do think sometimes people do need to be encouraged and helped back into work. And it is possible to psychologically convince yourself that you're not fit to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very sensible points made there. Steve McCabe, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for joining us. And I do wonder, I mean, if someone's, off work with anxiety, aren't they going to be anxious about any sort of announcement?
Yeah, I just think if these were Tory cuts, they'd be saying something different anyway.
Maybe.
Lots more coming up on today's show. US President Donald Trump, yes, he has announced a 25% tariff on all imported cars to America. What impact will this have on the likes of Bentley, Mini, Land Rover and Aston Martin?
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
If you've read Spare, you'll know that Prince Harry's very open, isn't he, about his drug taking in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see if he was honest in his visa application.
Well, we're absolutely waiting for it. Yes, he admitted he took cannabis, cocaine and magic mushrooms, as we know in Spare, and also the Netflix series. He said that. There's been so much talk about it, and obviously Judge Carl Nichols originally said he refused to release any footage, saying that he basically because of Prince Harry's privacy. But as we know, Trump, border security and application of rule is one of his priorities. And I do see Harry as a pawn, really, for Trump and collateral. So everyone's waiting to see what happens. Tuesday is the day, D-Day. We don't know whether Prince Harry is quaking in his boots. But, he quit being a working royal. Well, did he get preferential treatment? We don't know. There is possible misconduct. Apparently, DHS says that actually releasing the paperwork won't shed any light onto how things work. But there are thoughts as well that he could have entered on a special visa. Now, this is an A1 visa that deals with immigration paperwork. And it's a special kind of visa for heads of states and royal people. So Prince Harry could have got through on that, but we're waiting to hear. It's D-Day tomorrow.
GB News, the People's Channel.
The GB News
newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past midday. Now, the US President, Donald Trump, has announced a new 25% tariff on all imported cars. Now, surprisingly, perhaps, that does affect the United Kingdom, and in quite a bad way. The UK manufacturers, including Jaguar, Aston Martin and Rolls-Royce, are all staring down the barrel of these tariffs.
Yes, the move ratchets up the global trade war, but the UK government has signalled it will not retaliate by mirroring its response to the tariffs on steel and aluminium. So what impact will this have on the car market? And what is our tactic as a country to deal with this?
Well, we're joined now by our reporter, Steve Bennett, outside the Bentley headquarters in Crewe. Steve, this could really harm our economic prospects.
Good afternoon to you both. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, the Bentley HQ here in Crewe, it's a 24-hour operation. They're making cars, they're making parts, not just domestically, but internationally. So what's it going to mean to a British company of this size that now there's an extra 25% tariff on all their cars imported in the US? So, of course, it's not just British cars, it's Canadian cars, it's Japanese cars. And those two nations have already come out and said that they'll be having similar tariffs imposed now on American cars coming into their country. But as you mentioned, Rachel Reeves has come out and said that at the moment, Britain are not looking to retaliate with similar tariffs, and that conversations with the US government are ongoing to find a middle ground that will suit everybody. Because as you mentioned, the car industry is so important to Britain, to consumers, and so many people in the US drive British cars, not just Bentleys, but as you mentioned, Land Rover, Jaguar, Mini, and it's already been seen today that luxury car manufacturer Aston Martin, which of course is another British brand, their stocks have plummeted to a record low today as a result of this announcement by Donald Trump, which President Trump says that this will boost his economy and it will force manufacturers to switch to US soil. But of course, that doesn't help people like Bentley here in Crewe, which is a massive hub for local workers, for the local economy. They employ thousands and thousands of people here. And just in the time that I've been stood here today, there's been plenty of people purchasing new cars. There's been workers coming in and out. So it's a constant operation. And all of a sudden, who's going to pick up the extra fees, that 25% tariff? And Bentley had said previously that it's inevitable that it will come down to the consumers on both sides of the pond, actually, not just British or American consumers. Both will be subject to picking up this, because once prices go up, it's not just the cars, it's the parts. So if you are a US consumer buying a US car, a lot of those parts still come from abroad, so there'll be a 25% tariff on those parts as well. So it's a concerning time for the motor industry now in Britain, and as I mentioned there, Rachel Reeves, the conversations are ongoing, she said, with the UK and US government to find a resolution that suits all parties.
OK, well, Steve Bennett, this is a serious issue. I was surprised to be reading the numbers this morning. 18% of our car exports, by the number of cars that we export, they go to the United States, 18%. But by the value of these cars, because the Americans generally buy more expensive cars, that's 27% of our car exports by value. I mean, we're getting close now to a third of our car exports that could be 25% less attractive now to one of our largest markets.
Yes, and as you said there, prices are going up. All of a sudden cars, the price of cars are going up, and those extra 25% fees, someone's got to pay for it, and it's inevitably going to be the consumer, which Bentley already highlighted a week or so ago, looking ahead to this possible 25% tariff. So it does look like it'll be the consumers that suffer. They'll have to pick up the tab on both sides of the pond. And what does that mean? Does that mean we'll be importing and exporting less cars? It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out as the British government continue to negotiate with President Trump, hopefully for a solution that suits both parties.
Yeah, let's hope we can come to some kind of deal with the United States. Steve Bennett, thank you very much indeed. You're outside the Bentley car manufacturer in Crewe. What do you reckon? Hopeful?
I think
we can come to some arrangement.
I think it's wise that this government has not immediately slapped tariffs back on the United States.
So.
I think that the worst thing that we can do is get into a tit-for-tat trade war. We're taxing their stuff, they're taxing our stuff. This is the reflexive response of Canada, the reflexive response of the European Union, and it's just made things worse.
Yeah, then it just becomes a battle of egos, and the consumer is the one who suffers.
And the grown-up thing is to say, no, we're not going to put extra tariffs on the United States.
And we already have tariffs on them.
Because also, I hate the idea of putting tariff on the United States. That's a tax paid by If we put a tariff on another country, that's a tax paid by British consumers.
But you know what he's hoping? He's hoping that this will just, make their internal industry so much stronger.
Yeah, but it won't.
Yeah,
because the supply chains are what really matter.
He just wants the whole entire supply chain in his country.
And that's called autarky, and it doesn't work all too well.
Well, it's Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Let us know, are you hopeful we can come to an arrangement that doesn't end up with the death of British cars? But lots more coming up on today's show. We're going to be live in Paris because the Coalition of the Willing, as it's been called, continues to discuss peace in Ukraine. These are live pictures. There's Ursula von der Leyen there. We're expecting that press conference very shortly indeed.
Good afternoon. Your headlines at 12:33. At least 6 people have died and dozens of others have been rescued after a tourist submarine sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt. It's being reported the submarine, called Sinbad, was carrying 45 passengers, including children, who were all Russian nationals. The group had paid for a sea trip to the coral reefs in Hurghada. That's according to local media reports. Back in the UK, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has defended her handling of the economy after she announced welfare cuts and squeezed Whitehall budgets in her spring statement yesterday. Labour is bracing for backlash amid concerns about some 3 million families on incapacity benefits expected to be hit by the changes, while the OBR has halved its forecast for growth. But speaking to GB News this morning, the Chancellor said she's not complacent about the challenges families are facing.
Our forecast yesterday shows that the real household disposable income per person will be £500 greater at the end of the Parliament compared with the plans that I inherited. And obviously the last Parliament was the worst on record for living standards, and the OBR confirmed yesterday that real household disposable income will increase in every year of this Parliament. I recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite. I'm not complacent about the challenges that families face with their finance.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on all cars not made in the United States. Speaking from the Oval Office, the president said the move could generate more than $100 billion in new annual revenue. The president said the tariffs will come into effect on the 2nd of April.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. We start off with a 2.5% base, which is what we were at, and we go to 25%.
And the Chancellor has assured the government is engaged in extensive discussions with the US about what tariffs will mean for the UK. In other news now, thousands of jobs are at risk as British Steel consults unions over possible closure. Britain's second biggest steel producer is kicking off a consultation that could lead to the closure of its 2 blast furnaces in Scunthorpe and more than half of its workforce losing their jobs. Unions say that the news is devastating and are calling on the government to help secure the company's future. Scunthorpe Steelworks employs thousands of workers directly and through supply chains throughout the UK. And Just Stop Oil say they're giving up on protesting because their demands have been met. In an email to supporters, the environmental campaigners claim initial demand to end new oil and gas is now government policy, making us one of the most successful civil resistance campaigns in recent history. We've kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and the courts have ruled new oil and gas licences unlawful. It means no more throwing soup on paintings and slow marching in the streets, but there will be one last action on the 26th of April on Parliament Square. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2942 and €1.1992. The price of gold is £2,356.90 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,625 points.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report. Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News Travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. There are delays of up to 3/4 of an hour to Stenline sailings between Cairnryan and Belfast after a technical problem. In Greater Manchester, the A573 remains closed southbound from Goulburn Island to Newton and Willows after a lorry overturned on Tuesday. On the M6 in Cheshire, there's a lane closed where someone's broken down on the southbound entry slip road at junction 18 at Middlewich. In Essex, the A130 is closed southbound off the A12 near Chelmsford after an accident causing queues. And in Hampshire, the A31 is partly blocked eastbound by an accident just after the Fritham turn-off at Stony Cross. It's taking half an hour in queues almost back to Ringwood. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 20-1, or indeed 20-2 in Paris, where Keir Starmer is meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky there, just at the Elysee Palace. And they're walking together in what is a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. President Zelensky has been there. We've seen President Emmanuel Macron. We've seen the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. as well, a meeting not just of France and Britain and Ukraine, but actually of many countries across this political coalition.
And we understand that President Macron and Keir Starmer are going to be doing a bit of a joint press conference. That's probably going to be just after 1 o'clock, so do stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we're going to cross to Downing Street to speak to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's just been speaking with the Prime Minister's spokesperson about everything on today's political agenda. So what have you been told, Catherine?
Yes, good afternoon from Downing Street. Well, most of the discussion... Actually, no. Most of the discussion was on tariffs. I was going to say most of the discussion was on Spring Statement, but we started on that and then we moved on to tariffs. So on the Spring Statement, those figures about welfare cuts pushing 250,000 people into poverty, including 50,000 children. The Chancellor has said this morning that she's certain that no one will be pushed into poverty as a result of the welfare reform. Put my teeth back in. And we asked if that was the Prime Minister's view too. The Prime Minister's spokesman said that the PM shares that sentiment, and the principle of welfare reforms is to protect those who need support most, but also that the government wants to help people back into work, and that is the best way to lift people out of poverty. Now, the government are very keen to stress that the OBR's projections didn't include the £1 billion that the government is spending on helping and encouraging people back to work. So they're hoping that that is going to make a big difference. Also, I asked about that £500 figure. Yesterday, the government said that people would be £500 a year better off. I just wanted to find out the details of that. So that is £500 per person in real terms, so adjusted for inflation, by the end of this Parliament. Now, I was looking at the OBR figures yesterday, and it said that real disposable household income is only set to go up by like 0.5% on average every year between now and the end of the Parliament. It doesn't sound like much, but I was told that that's double the rate of increase in the last Parliament. Just a reflection, I suppose, of how things have felt pretty bleak for people for a long time, and no sign of that changing soon. But then, of course, we went straight on to tariffs, because it wasn't long after Rachel Reeves finished the press conference that Donald Trump gave a press conference announcing 25% tariffs on cars. Now, we export a lot of cars to the United States, some of our most expensive cars, and it's going to hit us very, very hard indeed. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesman said that we are disappointed by the United States' decision to put global tariffs, keen to stress it's global, on the automotive industry. But they are continuing conversations towards a wider economic deal, and they're keeping all options on the table and taking a pragmatic approach. Now, we asked over and over again in many sorts of ways, is this the right approach? Isn't this going to make us look weak? They just won't go there. They will not say anything at all that could be construed as being critical of the president. And we asked about the digital services tax. Rachel Reeves has said that's important. That could raise $800 million a year. We are told that that is up for discussion. They won't go on that either. And we also asked if Donald Trump was acting in good faith. And again, they don't want to discuss it. We asked too about British Steel, because of course it's only a few weeks since the US slapped tariffs on steel. We didn't retaliate. We sort of took it on the chin, and now we have this awful news today that the Chinese owners of British Steel are likely to close the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe. I was up in Scunthorpe only a few weeks ago when the government were touting that British Steel was going to be used for the Terminal 5 airport expansion happening this year. Things change very fast indeed.
Oh dear, Catherine, it's not a pretty picture you paint. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster there outside Downing Street, talking to the Prime Minister's spokesperson. Lots of economic news to digest, some of it completely global, others domestically inflicted.
It does make you ask the question. I mean, yesterday the Chancellor announced these billions of pounds of cuts on the basis of a 5-year forecast. so that we have £9.9 billion of headroom by 2030. Well, this document published yesterday, all of these different changes... I mean, the economic changes that have happened this morning make much of this out of date now.
Probably wish the announcement had come yesterday. It would have made a good excuse for all the cuts.
How can she plan 5 years ahead when stuff like... Anyway.
Well, you can't. The OBR forecasts nonsense. Anyway, search of winter sun, are you? I mean, it's not winter anymore. Are you in search of spring sun? Is the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Heavy showers and thunderstorms moving their way eastwards across Europe, affecting regions around the Adriatic Sea. But there is some sunshine in places. The odd shower affecting Madeira and Tenerife. But after all the heavy rain from the beginning of March, Portugal, Spain seeing a much better week with plenty of sunshine on offer. But moving our way eastwards, these are going to be where we see those heavy showers and thunderstorms affecting the Adriatic Sea coasts and also Greece. But we'll see a steady improvement as we head into next week. But the best of the temperatures across Tenerife.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for southern parts of the country, but it is turning increasingly wet and blustery further north as a number of weather fronts come south associated with this area of low pressure. So a more unsettled phase, albeit relatively short-lived, across northern parts of the country during the rest of Thursday. It is going to turn increasingly wet then for much of Scotland, but especially for western and northern Scotland, the rain pushing into Northern Ireland during the afternoon as well. The winds picking up, some strong wind gusts, particularly around coasts and hills. So feeling on the cool side because of the unsettled weather arriving. But further south, plenty of fine weather for England and Wales away from western hills and some decent sunshine in the southeast with another warm day expected. But as we go into the evening, this is when the wettest weather arrives into the central belt, the winds picking up as well, so an unpleasant end to the day. Northern Ireland, outbreaks of rain on and off, and there will be some drier weather, but a lot of cloud. The rain just about pushing into Cumbria at this stage. Wales seeing a lot of cloud cover and a few spots of rain over the hills, but staying clear for much of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. However, this unsettled weather in the north is sinking southeast overnight. It's going to be turning increasingly wet for northern and western England as well as Wales during the early hours. The rain will be relatively short-lived as it moves through, but there could be some heavy bursts during the hours of darkness. And, of course, with the rain, it's going to stay mild in the south, although colder air is arriving into northern parts of the country with blustery showers following and some snow on the hills of Scotland. And we start off Friday with that rain clearing the southeast, and by lunchtime I think it's out of the way, with brighter skies returning to all, a mix of sunny spells and showers, feeling much cooler, particularly for northern parts of the country where the wind will be gusty and temperatures will reach 9 to 11 Celsius.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 10 minutes to 1 and no more soup on paintings. No more roadblocks. No more smashed windows. Well, Just Stop Oil is announcing it's ending its headline-grabbing protests with a final march set for the 26th of April.
Yeah, put that in your diary. The group claims victory in its fight against new oil and gas projects because Ed Miliband has done what they said, but they say it's planning a new strategy for future activism.
Well, we're joined now by our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, for more on this. And Mark, I'm initially suspicious of what Just Stop Oil are saying today. What do you make of it?
I think you're right to be a little suspicious because this group really has reinvented itself multiple times over the years in terms of direct action that it's taken place in towns and cities right across the country. Remember, of course, Extinction Rebellion, for instance. So we got protests that started out as stopping traffic at major junctions in the likes of London. That spread out to be even more disruptive because they weren't getting enough attention. They got some initial attention, but then they weren't getting the kind of attention they wanted nationally because the disruption at junctions in London just weren't doing it. So they moved, remember, to the motorways and key arterial motorways from north to south, the M25 around London as well. And they certainly got
I remember
a lot of attention for that. And then there was the sporting events, running on and, you know, jumping and disrupting key snooker tournaments, running onto pitches at football and rugby tournaments, tennis matches, and of course also art galleries and things like that. Well, there you're looking at Stonehenge. That was cornflower, we're told, and other paint that was sprayed onto Stonehenge, and this is Van Gogh.
What I
They're worried about rising fascism as well, apparently. So that's good.
Of course they are. Yeah, look, they're desecrating the grave of Charles Darwin.
Oh, that was pretty
sick.
But listen, what they say is that they believe that they have achieved some of their key objectives because the reason that this group was brought into sort of being was to try to ensure that there was no new oil and gas licences.
But Mark, that doesn't make any sense because the government stopped new oil and gas licences as soon as it got in July last year. There have been so many of these different attacks. I mean, the desecration of Darwin's grave was only a month or so ago. I mean, why didn't they stop? Why didn't they stop as soon as this government got elected?
There's no doubt there's been a lag from when this government got into power to when Just Stop Oil say they have now completed what their main task was, to stop these new oil and gas licences. But I would not be surprised if we see this group reinventing itself, or at least coming up with new tactics that are just as disruptive, maybe not disruptive in terms of stopping everyday people in their tracks, but going after big corporations may be the next step for them.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to hang up their boots.
No. Watch this space. Well, stay with us here on GB News. We're going to be live with the Prime Minister next.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for southern parts of the country, but it is turning increasingly wet and blustery further north as a number of weather fronts come south associated with this area of low pressure. So a more unsettled phase, albeit relatively short-lived, across northern parts of the country during the rest of Thursday. It is going to turn increasingly wet then for much of Scotland, but especially for western and northern Scotland. The rain pushing into Northern Ireland during the afternoon as well. The wind's picking up, some strong wind gusts, particularly around coasts and hills. So feeding on the cool side because of the unsettled weather arriving. But further south, plenty of fine weather for England and Wales away from western hills, and some decent sunshine in the southeast with another warm day expected. But as we go into the evening, this is when the wettest weather arrives into the central belt. The wind's picking up as well, so an unpleasant end to the day. Northern Ireland, outbreaks of rain on and off, and there will be some drier weather, but a lot of cloud. The rain just about pushing into Cumbria at this stage. Wales seeing a lot of cloud cover and a few spots of rain over the hills, but staying clear for much of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. However, this unsettled weather in the north is sinking southeast overnight. It's going to be turning increasingly wet for northern and western England as well as Wales during the early hours. The rain will be relatively short-lived as it moves through, but there could be some heavy bursts during the hours of darkness. And, of course, with the rain, it's going to stay mild in the south, although colder air is arriving into northern parts of the country with blustery showers following and some snow on the hills of Scotland. And we start off Friday with that rain clearing the southeast, and by lunchtime I think it's out of the way, with brighter skies returning to all, a mix of sunny spells and showers, feeling much cooler, particularly for northern parts of the country where the wind will be gusty, and temperatures will reach 9 to 11 Celsius.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's just 2 weeks left to see how you could be a spring winner, as we have an incredible £17,777 in tax-free cash to be won. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also give you the latest Mulberry handbag and not 1, but 2 sought-after designer watches. Make sure you don't miss out, as lines close on the 4th of April. For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, I'm a bit irritated today. So there's 2 secret files that have been released, one on Prince Harry and his visa claim and getting citizenship in the USA. And what do we learn from it? Nothing. Nothing, because it's all redacted. And then the biggest one of all, history. So Donald Trump says, yes, we can see the JFK files, we have nothing to hide there, whatever. It's all redacted. There's nothing, we don't learn anything new from this. Now, you've studied, you've been like me, you've been fascinated like this since you were a kid.
Yeah, I have. I don't... I mean, let's be honest, is there likely to be files somewhere that's actually saying Grassy Knoll and Magic Bullet...
Giving you the truth.
And that it was the mafia and that it was to do with J. Edgar Hoover or anything else? I don't believe all that stuff anyway. I honestly don't.
Well, how do you explain that it wasn't JFK's brain that was in the post-mortem? It was a different brain. His brain was substituted.
You know what? That's the first I've heard of that.
Well, you see, I thought
it was a different brain. How did they know? How do they know it wasn't his brain?
Well, they may have known what his brain was like.
Well, the doctor in Dallas who was there to do the post-mortem because it was his area.
Yes.
Wasn't allowed to do the post-mortem.
That's right, because they wanted to fly him back to Washington, right?
CIA or the FBI, whatever, took the body away.
Right.
And they had time to do whatever they wanted, and doctor anything the way they wanted. But, I mean, and there definitely were 2 shooters. There were 2 shooters involved in this.
I don't believe that.
Because of the magic bullet?
No, the puff of smoke from the grassy knoll.
Maybe I'm being extremely naive, that's all, but for everything that I've seen, everything I've read, I think that Lee Harvey Oswald, how about this, actually did it.
What?
And did it alone.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock, and in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. They've been speaking in Paris. Let's listen in.
We've just had a very constructive meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, bigger than we've had before, 30 countries, plus of course NATO and the EU, and absolutely determined to see peace through strength. There was absolute clarity that Russia is trying to delay, is playing games, and we have to be absolutely clear about that. And that has meant 3 outcomes. Firstly, more support for Ukraine to make sure Ukraine is in the strongest possible position, both now and in further negotiations. Second, complete clarity that now is not the time for lifting of sanctions. Quite the contrary, what we discussed is how we can increase sanctions to support the US initiative to bring Russia to the table through further pressure from this group of countries. And of course, we discussed further the plans for reassuring the peace, the coalition of the willing and the military and operational plans, whether they're on the land, the air or the sea. But there was very strong support, and what came out most strongly from the meeting was so many countries standing, as they've stood for over 3 years now with Ukraine, standing in this crucial moment for as long as it takes. Vladimir, you have our support. You must have felt that in the room. Our full support for as long as it takes.
Thank you very much, Keir. Thank you for your support. Thanks to France and to Emmanuel for organizing this meeting and leadership of France and UK of this coalition of willing. I think that Keir almost said all the outcomes which are very important for us. No lifting of any kind of sanctions until Russia will stop this war. And I think more pressure on it, more packages of sanctions. This is important. The second point, as you said, Keir, that new packages to strengthen Ukraine. And we heard of some of the leaders' new packages. We are very thankful to all the leaders. And we had that was very good, 41 countries, the common voice, how to strengthen, how to push Russia, and everybody. That is crucial, that everybody understood and understand that Russia for today doesn't want any kind of peace. That is very important. And we will work on security guarantees the closest weeks and days. And I think this is very important, not only for today, to think about our future. Thank you.
Please come into the embassy.
Could Ukraine survive without European troops, sir?
Well, there, a quick summary from the Prime Minister of his brief bilateral meeting with the Ukrainian President Zelensky. But of course, we're expecting a fuller press conference from the Prime Minister in a few minutes' time, where he'll be questioned thoroughly by the press. With us is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, because this is an important day with regard to the sort of rump coalition, without the United States, of course, of what's being known as the coalition of the willing.
Yeah, but to be fair, the coalition of the willing, which is being led by France and by the UK, is in limbo at the moment because they really don't know how to proceed until we get an indication as to whether any kind of ceasefire, temporary or otherwise, is going to be agreed to by both sides. Now, Ukraine says it's already agreed to conditions to allow a ceasefire in the Black Sea. Russia, we're told, had initially agreed to that, but had since said that they want to see a number of conditions agreed to beforehand, including a relaxation of some of the sanctions that they face, something that the EU apparently is not willing to do. So lots of things up in the air there. The talks that really matter are the negotiations that have been going on in Riyadh between the US, Russia, with Ukrainian involvement as well. And I think really Europe and other allies are just going to have to react to that once they know where we are.
So do you feel as though perhaps this is more for show than any practical use? I mean, we have a coalition of the willing, but we're not sure willing to do what and when.
Well, I think they're certainly trying to continue to appear relevant in this process, but I'm not sure how relevant they really are. And I mean, even the issues around a peacekeeping force, Vladimir Putin has been as clear as you could ever be. He will never accept NATO or European troops in Ukraine as part of this peace negotiation. So even if a peace deal is agreed at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin saying that a big element of that will be the Russian assertion that no NATO troops or European troops should be in Ukraine at all. So there's a lot of planning going on. We know about that because we've had 3 days of talks involving military leaders from 30 different countries who've been at Northwood, the operational military headquarters in North London. They're trying to figure out exactly what contributions from various countries could be and how that might work in practice. But if Vladimir Putin stays true to his word that he is just not going to accept these peacekeepers, what are they going to do? Are they going to force their way into Ukraine with all the potential ramifications that might have? I can't really see that.
It's such a curious position because obviously the Europeans are waiting for the Americans, but the Americans are irritated that the Europeans didn't do more in the first place. Mark, do stay with us because we're going to get much more on this. We're going to go straight to Paris, where Christopher Hope, our political editor, joins us. And Chris, this press conference seems to be being a little delayed at the moment.
Yeah, we're now expecting it live on GBNews at 1:40 in your show. That's a press conference with Keir Starmer. You've seen the meeting there take place there with Volodymyr Zelensky, and Mark White correctly saying it's in limbo. This is a third meeting of these leaders in about 6 weeks since that kind of crisis was triggered by the arrival of Donald Trump and that meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky. And so far we haven't really got much out of Russia, and that's why you've got these rather increasingly desperate statements from Number 10. You've got Keir Starmer saying that why won't Putin play ball? He needs to play ball, or willing to play ball. He's not a serious player in these peace talks. I mean, Putin is, frankly, appearing to string everyone along. And we're also, in our position as UK, trying to negotiate for support with the US. We can't do anything with troops on the ground until we have that air cover with the fast jets or radar cover. And there's some rather bellicose remarks coming out from Russia this lunchtime. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman, Maria Zakharova, she says that the UK and France are, quote, hatching plans for an intervention to lead to direct conflict between NATO and Russia. Big issues there, and I think there's no real debate, I think, certainly in Parliament, where we normally work in our team at GB News, where are MPs debating should UK troops be involved? What is the protection for UK troops? I mean, I think that's a real worry for GB News viewers and listeners, and that conversation hasn't happened yet. And in fact, the Prime Minister so far has only said he'll consult Parliament, not give MPs a vote. I think that kind of certainty is what's required.
And sometimes these press conferences do get hijacked by domestic issues, don't they, despite them being demonstrably on something that is foreign affairs related. Could it be that Starmer is pressed on things closer to home, such as the spring statement and the like?
I think that's nailed on going to happen. This is the first response from Keir Starmer to yesterday's spring statement, and looking at those pretty dreadful front pages for the government today, the question will be, you know, are you with your Chancellor here, Prime Minister? Are you willing to write cheques on the backs of the poorest to fund a war in Ukraine, which not everyone might agree with? Are you going to do that? Are you concerned that you come into power and you've slashed the aid budget, you've removed the winter fuel payment, you've increased taxes for employers, that comes in next week, by the way, and now you're attacking or going after the most people who need the most on benefits. Is that why you're in politics? I mean, all sorts of questions for Keir Starmer to address domestically. Yet again, he's being pulled both ways. He's trying to lead on the world stage with France and lead this coalition of the willing to create this force to enforce any peace deal after a ceasefire. But at home, it's not easy at all, and will get worse. I think next week there's about 9 or 10 different increases in bills. The cost of living crisis is getting much, much worse, and if all he's got to offer is 500 quid, well, that will barely touch the sides.
Well, Chris, this is a significant moment, of course, for not just this country, not just Ukraine, but really the global international order. And we'll be keeping up with you, of course, throughout the programme as things develop and as the Prime Minister speaks. Now we're expecting at 1:40.
OK, well, in other news, the US President Donald Trump, he's announced a new 25% tariff on all imported cars, with UK manufacturers, including Jaguar, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, all staring down the barrel.
Well, the move ratchets up that global trade war, but the United Kingdom government has signalled it will not retaliate by mirroring its response. What will the impact be on the car market here at home?
Well, we're joined by our reporter Steve Bennett, who is outside the Bentley headquarters up in Crewe. Steve, tell us, are there worries on the ground there for this particular manufacturer?
Yes, hello to you both. There are, because as you said, the impact will be that the consumers ultimately are going to have to pick up the tab. There'll be 25% additional fees now on cars being exported to the US. It makes approximately a third of our imports less appealing because all of a sudden there's 25% tariffs on those cars going into the US. Has to be said, not just from Britain, from other countries, or anyone, in fact, who's importing a car, a non-US car into America. So Canada and Japan have already said that they're going to impose similar tariffs immediately on American cars. We have not done that. Rachel Reeves has not said that we are going to do that. She said that it's not part of our plan as it currently stands. We don't want to escalate a trade war because that doesn't benefit anybody. But as you mentioned there, this is a hub of industry, in a hub of car manufacturing industry here in Crewe, and it employs thousands and thousands of people round the clock. Not only are they making the cars here, they're making the parts here, which are exported all over the globe. So not only will that affect consumers on this side of the pond, but also in America as well, because if they're buying a British car, the cost is, of course, going to go up. But if you're buying an American car, your parts still come from countries like Britain, like Japan, like Canada. So the fees are now on top of your usual price. And Bentley, a week or so ago, did come out and say that it's inevitable that the consumers will be the ones that have to pick up the tab here. Now, just this morning, we saw that luxury car maker Aston Martin, another British brand, their stocks have plummeted to a record low. So we're already seeing the impact on British cars. And Rachel Reeves, although she's come out and said there's no plans to slap any tariffs on America immediately, you have to ask the question, what's going to happen long term? But conversations are ongoing between the US and between Britain to try and find a deal that suits all parties to make sure that business can continue as normal and it doesn't escalate into a trade war.
OK, well, Steve Bennett, thanks very much for bringing us that outside Bentley headquarters, one of those high-value manufacturers. And it's those high-value cars that are going to be most impacted. We sell more of the expensive stuff to the United States, so it does take a significant chunk of cars by value.
And a lot of our manufacturers, traditional brands, are sort of owned by foreign companies, aren't they, anyway? Don't ask me which ones, but I'm sure some of them are.
But even if they're owned by other companies, if the cars are produced in this country, I mean, for example, Nissan produces a lot of cars in this country. Japanese firm, cars made in this country, often sold overseas as well as domestically. But it's numbers being batted around today. 18% of cars exported are being exported to the United States. That's true, but by value, it's 27% of the amount of cash we get for our exports.
Big chunk.
Big chunk.
Big chunk. Well, in other news, no more soup on paintings, no more roadblocks, no annoying stunts. Just Stop Oil has announced it's ending its headline-grabbing protests, but they will have a final march set for April the 26th.
Yes, well, the group claims that it's won victory in its fight against new oil and gas projects, but it says it's planning a new strategy for future activism. What on earth could that be? Joining us now is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, it's a curious statement at a curious time.
Yes, and remember, these activist groups have constantly reinvented themselves anyway, gone from one particular cause to another, and often it's been many of the same people involved in a lot of the direct action. Remember Extinction Rebellion, of course, before Just Stop Oil as well, involved in these disruption tactics. This is Stonehenge there being covered in cornflour and paint. There are people trying to stop them. Van Gogh paintings covered in paint as well, to the shock of those in the gallery there. I mean, it's just, from many people's point of view, it will be welcome because it was kind of direct action that actually alienated probably more people than it ever brought on board. From the activist point of view, they will claim that there's success here. One, because they say they've achieved what they set out to achieve, Just Stop Oil, that is, which was to stop future licensing of oil and gas in the North Sea. The UK government, the Labour government, has now done that. But as far as this activist and other activist groups are concerned, as much as they alienate, the sort of the public as a large proportion of the public anyway, what they will argue back is that, look, we are high profile because we do these kind of tactics, because we cause such disruption. And despite people being very angry, they're talking about the issue. It raises the issue and gets it debated in a way it would never have been before. So on that point of view, there is success for them in enjoying the sort of profile they do and getting the topic addressed. But as to whether people actually like them and like their tactics, I think very few people like their tactics, even on the left.
Yeah,
they feel that they're probably counterproductive.
Probably, yeah. And they've given a big gold star to Ed Miliband, haven't they?
Well, yes,
100%.
for the moment, let's just see if they agree with all of his net zero policies. But I would imagine, before we get too relaxed about this signalling an end to these direct interventions, these types of protests, that there will be another group that comes along with another campaign that they want to publicise and cause disruption in order to get that kind of publicity. Because there was a bit of a split within Just Stop Oil itself at the tactics that they adopted. There were some within that movement that absolutely were for as much disruption as possible to try to do everything that I've achieved, but others who felt that it was counterproductive.
If anything, has this been not a sort of exogenous change to their tactics? Because ultimately, the people that you were describing as the most willing to be the most disruptive, well, there have been several high-profile court cases that mean, like, Roger Hallam and Phoebe Plummer, and perhaps the most disruptive of those people, are now in prison. So perhaps this isn't an assessment of government policy by Just Stop Oil at all. Perhaps this is simply that the people who are most willing to go and climb that gantry over the M25 or throw that can of soup over an old masterwork of art, those people are now locked behind bars, so there's not very much they can do.
Listen, there's no doubt that the way in which the offences that have been committed by those taking part in direct action have now being treated within our criminal justice system is more severe than it was when they first started out. They would have known that when they first started out on these direct action protests, that actually they would probably get a slap on the wrist, at most a fine or community service. But because of the outcry around the country and politicians clearly wanting to stop the very significant disruption that had been caused during these campaigns, we saw these prison sentences being handed down, 4 years, for instance, for M25 protests. That is a very significant sentence, and that will have had a cooling effect on those probably who are willing to put themselves forward, knowing that there is a potential of a jail term.
And that particular sentence, the 4 years, was originally 5 years for Roger Hallam, who was the guy that founded this group and many other of these groups. On the 7th of March this year, so only a couple of weeks ago, that was appealed. It was reduced down to 4 years, but that was the end of the process. Clearly, he hasn't been granted any more appeals. I mean, the timing does fit here that, the most disruptive and senior members of this group are now in prison, and now the group's over. I mean, this is a vindication for all of those who were saying lock them up to start with.
Well, I certainly think it will have put some people off from taking part in the direct action that thought, they don't want to go to prison. They believe in the cause, but actually, when it comes to having to serve time behind bars...
They don't believe that much.
Well, you can put it that way, yeah. But listen, there will still be activists within that group that are willing to go out and cause disruption. Now, the group as a whole have taken this decision at this time not to go ahead with this disruptive direct action, but that doesn't mean, as I say, that there aren't activists out there that are more than willing to cause disruption to get the kind of publicity they want for their cause, that in some way, in some shape or form, in the coming weeks and months, might not sort of splinter off into another group. It might be on climate, it might be on something else. It could be related to Gaza. We've seen a lot of Gaza direct action protests, and they show no sign of slowing down. They're continuing.
And Greta Thunberg certainly, morphed herself into a pro-Palestine, anti-Israel activist very quickly indeed. Haven't seen her on the environmental issue for a while, actually.
No, but this is the thing.
Interesting, isn't it? They have these professional activists.
They wear their opinions like fashionable clothes.
Yeah, a different badge every day, isn't it?
And, it's a new season, it's a new fashion, it's a new fashionable opinion that is the right thing to say in the trendy locations.
Whereas we haven't got any fashionable opinions.
As they carry around mobile phones built by American, globalist companies around the world. So, yes.
The evil tech companies.
Maybe they don't wear the sort of trendy designer clothes as much.
Oh, but Greta Thunberg did sail across the Atlantic. Well, she didn't sail herself, actually. There were 4 Germans who sailed her across the Atlantic in order to speak at a conference in America. But, of course, they didn't sail back. Those 4 people who travelled one way to get her across then all flew back. So, it's all performative, isn't it?
So performative. Well, thank you, Mark, for talking us through all of that. Hopefully it is the end of these stunts, but I think a little bit of scepticism is good.
Yeah, well, Mark White, thank you very much indeed. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, there's plenty more coming on today's programme, including Morrison's, the supermarket, is letting mothers and their children queue jump at checkouts this Sunday in order to make Mother's Day extra special. Well, our debate this hour, should this be a permanent fixture in all British supermarkets?
Why not, eh?
Queue jumps for mums. Well, that's to come after this.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 1. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch over Trump's new tariff announcement.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Ian has had to say, we already pay tariffs on US cars. Starmer needs to look away from the UAE, the EU, the UAE, the EU, and get a US trade deal done.
That'd be nice, yes. A nice free trade deal, special just for us, while he slaps tariffs on everyone else.
Yeah, and to be fair,
Come
the
on,
Canadians did have a special free trade deal with the Americans until they didn't.
Well, let's hope Trump likes us better. Neil says, I can't find much sympathy with Bentley owners. The fact is, most of the UK exports to the United States are in services, which are completely unaffected.
Oh, hang on.
What have you got against Bentley owners, Neil?
This isn't about Bentley owners. They're in America.
Yeah, we want to sell them.
This is about the people who make the Bentleys. I mean, how many people who work in the factory making Bentleys own a Bentley themselves? I don't think that very many likely do.
Imagine if they get a 5% discount. It's like, oh, that'll make it £200,000 instead of 210.
I mean, Bentleys cost more than houses, but this is about the people who work in the factories building those cars. I mean, these are export jobs. I mean, if you're making the most fine sort of expensive exports, what matters is it's becoming harder to export to our largest single market, the United States.
We ought to hope that we can grow our exports elsewhere. That we can find new markets to sell our Bentley cars to.
We have joined the CPTPP.
Maybe that can
win
us some trade.
A comprehensive, progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Very progressive.
A great one.
It's a bit woke, actually.
Well, they called it the TPP, and then America withdrew, so they rebranded it as the Comprehensive and Progressive TPP.
Well, there you go. And on Keir Starmer's visit to Paris, Alan says, bet he hasn't challenged Macron on stopping the boats. Remove fishing licences now. Yes, I do wonder if that one came up. It has been yet another record, however many months it's been, since January. Highest on of any year yet, so that's nice.
Well, do keep those views coming in. gbnews.com/your say is the way to do so. But we're going to move to our debate now, because Morrison's, the supermarket, is letting mums and kids queue jump at checkouts this Sunday, all in order to make Mother's Day extra special.
Yes, 50,000 boxes of chocolates will also be given to mums, and shop assistants will assist them with packing their shopping at the checkout. How lovely. But it got us thinking, didn't it?
It did. Should this be a permanent fixture in all of our supermarkets? Should we introduce special mum lanes in supermarkets all the time?
Why not, I say? Well, joining us now to debate this is broadcaster and writer Emma Wool and parenting expert Annette Kello. Emma, I'll start with you. Do you think we should have these mums lanes?
I think we need mum lanes all the time, every day. I think we need help with packing. I think ideally we need a chauffeur service home as well. Honestly, supermarkets with small children are a nightmare. I'm probably the only person in the world, Tom will be shocked, I'm the only person in the world who doesn't do online shopping, doesn't do home deliveries. And with a 20-kilogram child and a bike and a rucksack full of shopping, it is a nightmare. But on a more serious note, I think that the idea of mum lanes, I think just having a greater awareness of the difficulties of everyday tasks, things like shopping, things like queuing, things like getting up and down stairs, on and off buses with prams when you've got a baby, all of that kind of thing, uneven pavements. And not just for mums, but for disabled people, for the elderly. I think it would be a kinder, nicer place if we gave priority to people who do struggle with everyday tasks.
OK, Emma, I must just say on my behalf, I don't actually do online food shopping. I'm just never home. But we're going to
I'm never home. I'm always out socialising and partying and hobnobbing with the rich and powerful.
Annette Kello, what do you make of what Emma had to say?
Well, also, I am a person who likes to shop in store, but I think with the mum lanes, it's a little bit OTT in the sense that people should just be generally courteous, kind. They should be seeing... I've seen it where people, I've had my pram and people don't move. And so I think it's a general awareness needs to be better. But I also think if they want to really pull out the punches and give mums a good time, I think it's time they gave us better discounts. They don't give any discounts for formula because they want mums to breastfeed.
need. And we all know supermarkets' profits are hugely up. Marks and Spencer's 425 million last year, Tesco's 1.1 billion. Excuse me, why can't you give me some freebies, OK? And a free facial while you're at it.
OK, well, Emma, I guess the other argument here is that it's a bit sexist. You know, should there be a dad lane for the few single dads we have in this country?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, a parenting lane, why not? Absolutely. And I think...
Oh, no, Emma, it's got to be mums or nothing.
Mums or nothing. And single mums, by the way, we get extra chocolates and priority gold boarding. So we get, like, not even jumping the queue. We get, like, the whole lot free, maybe.
OK, I know supermarkets are big, but what sort of TARDIS supermarket are we looking at, where you have infinite lanes for any special interest group? Is this all getting a bit silly, Annette? I mean, surely, I mean, we can't have different lanes for every different
How would you feel if you were queuing up in Tesco and some pushy mum with her pram came in and said, I'm going first, this is the mum's lane, get out, you all.
It would depend how late I am to the party and how many bottles of vodka I was trying to carry at one time.
Well, you might have to start going around then with a fake pram and a doll in it, just so you can skip the queues. I mean, where is this all going to end? I think it's a little bit silly. Also, the fact they only have 50,000 boxes of chocolates, a little bit worrying for me, because what if somebody wants to take 2 boxes? How far is 50,000 going to go? Give us some discounts on the nappies and the rest of it, and we'll all be very happy.
This is a really good point from Annette. I mean, people might well want to take advantage. If there's a very, very busy... And I know, because of Sunday trading restrictions, all of these shops have so little time to trade legally.
You managed to get Sunday trading restrictions.
Certainly did. The government stops these shops from opening for as long as they probably should. So sometimes the queues are horrendous on a Sunday. And so people might well bring in a pram, hide a pretend baby. Or even... I know some people think of themselves as, you know, dog or cat parents. Would they count in the parenting lane?
Oh, yes, service animal, that's the other one. They'll be bringing in a dog in a pram. Where is this going to end?
Emma, just last word to you.
Just last word. Well, a couple of funny suggestions online. We don't need mum lanes, we need better behaved children. But Tom, just to come back on your point, people taking advantage of this, trust me, you spend one day with a small child, you would be weeping. You would be begging for mercy. No one will take advantage of this by having more children to get into the mums lanes. It's just not worth... The cost-benefit analysis doesn't stack up.
Oh, no, but you could just borrow one for the supermarket trip, Emma, you see. Emma, well, thank you very much indeed. And Annette Kello, great to have you on. A bit of a fun one there, but, you know, why not, I say, Tom?
Substantive news. No, I don't know. I think generally the point that we should just all be a bit more courteous as a society.
People aren't, though, are they?
Without these special dispensations.
They aren't very courteous. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GBNews. Lots more coming up. Yes, we will be live in Paris for that now very much delayed press conference with Keir Starmer and President Macron. And we're also going to be talking sewage because it's finally revealed England's waterways continue to drown in waste. We're going to know exactly by how much, aren't we?
We are. For the first time ever, every single sewage overflow is now monitored. So we'll get those numbers to you after the headlines with Sophia.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Your headlines at 1:34. Sir Keir Starmer is in Paris for a summit of Ukraine's allies to accuse Vladimir Putin of making hollow promises in ceasefire talks. The Prime Minister has been meeting the so-called Coalition of the Willing hours after French President Emmanuel Macron suggested a European peacekeeping force could respond if attacked by Russia. Meanwhile, Sir Keir and Volodymyr Zelensky have just been speaking outside the summit. The Ukrainian leader praised Sir Keir Starmer and the Coalition of the Willing for their commitment.
All the outcomes, which are very important for us, no lifting of any kind of sanctions until Russia will stop this war. And I think more pressure on it, more packages of sanctions. This is important. The second point, everybody understood and understand that Russia for today doesn't want any kind of peace. That is very important. And we will work on security guarantees.
Back in the UK, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has defended her handling of the economy after she announced welfare cuts and squeezed Whitehall budgets in her spring statement yesterday. Labour is bracing for backlash amid concerns about some 3 million families on incapacity benefits expected to be hit by the changes. Meanwhile, the OBR has halved its forecast for growth. But speaking to GB News this morning, she said she is not complacent about the challenges families are facing.
Our forecast yesterday shows that the real household disposable income per person will be £500 greater at the end of the Parliament compared with the plans that I inherited. And obviously the last Parliament was the worst on record for living standards, and the OBR confirmed yesterday that real household disposable income will increase in every year of this Parliament. I recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite. I'm not complacent about the challenges that families face with their finance.
In other news, at least 6 people have died and dozens of others have been rescued after a tourist submarine sank in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt. It's being reported the submarine, called Sinbad, was carrying 45 passengers, including children who were all Russian nationals. The group had paid for a sea trip to the coral reefs in Hurghada. That's according to local media reports. And a ban on ninja swords campaigned for by the family of a murdered teenager is set to come into force by the summer. 16-year-old Ronan Kanda was stabbed to death with a ninja sword yards away from his home in Wolverhampton in 2022 in a case of mistaken identity. A series of anti-knife crime measures called Ronan's Law will now make it illegal to possess, sell, make or import ninja swords from the 1st of August. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2939 and €1.2 thousand. The price of gold is £2,351 and 76 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,616 points.
My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report. Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
The latest GB News Travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. There are delays of up to 3/4 of an hour to Stena Line sailings between Cairn and Ryan and Belfast after a technical problem. In Greater Manchester, the A573 remains closed southbound off the A580 East Lancs Road from Colborne Island to Newton Le Willows after a lorry overturned on Wednesday. On the M11 in Cambridgeshire, there are long northbound delays after traffic was stopped because of an accident between junctions 12 and 13 near Cambridge. Queues back to junction 11 for the A10 south of Cambridge, and Eurotunnel reporting a wait of up to half an hour for passengers at Folkestone. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Anna, let's have a look at this. And how do we tackle the work of one of Britain's most infamous white supremacists?
Yes.
William Shakespeare.
Oh no. That William Shakespeare. Yes.
Why is he being? Why are some people saying he's a white supremacist?
So this seems to mostly be based on some research that was carried out in 2022 by some academics that concluded that essentially promoting Shakespeare, as they said, benefits the ideology of white European supremacy, because the argument is that effectively you're saying that this kind of culture is superior to others. But, you know, I'm afraid most people who read Shakespeare will conclude that it is superior to most things that are written. And that's nothing to do with him being white. That's just to do with him being a genius. And it's very depressing seeing this, but also the amount of time, effort and presumably funding is spent on these sort of projects. It actually, I think, does a disservice to the youth, to young people, because by effectively erasing or trying to rewrite history, they then don't actually learn about the struggles people have gone through. So it's a bizarre one.
But I find it astonishing, because this is Birmingham University that's done this study, or an academic from Birmingham University. Birmingham should be celebrating everything great about the Midlands. It should be biased. If Birmingham and Stratford itself cannot celebrate what makes Stratford and Birmingham great, because celebrating a successful British writer from centuries ago reduces the visibility of writers from other countries that had nothing to do with us in the first place.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Just gone 20 to 2. Now it's happened again. England's waterways are drowning in sewage. New figures show that a record 3.6 million hours of spills were recorded in 2024. Now that's worse than the previous year.
It's hard to imagine 3.6 million hours of spillages, but try to. So why are water companies still paying out huge bonuses? And what's being done to stop all this poo going into our waters?
Well, we're joined now by the founder of Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, Ash Smith. Ash, thanks so much for joining us. Is it not true to say that 2024 was, yes, the highest year on record, but perhaps more importantly, the first year that we actually monitored every single storm overflow drain? It could have been far worse in previous years and we simply didn't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. The monitoring is it's an improvement, but unfortunately, we're talking about numbers of events, spill events, and we're talking about hours. So you could be talking about, for an event, 1 minute of a trickle of sewage, or you could be talking about 24 hours of a full-on gush of something really that we don't want to be talking about at any time of day. So what it points to is years and years of underinvestment, water companies, shareholders taking the money and just relying on being able to get away with this, because you're right, they have got away with doing this for years, just pointed out by campaigners like ourselves. It's more of a kind of a public awareness thing now, which has to be a good thing.
Yes, and I suppose it's a good thing that we have the transparency now that we know just how many hours of spills are being recorded in this country, which is good to know. What can these companies actually do about it, though? Of course, huge investment is going to cost money.
Yep, they keep talking about investment. Well, let's be really clear that the only money that water companies spend is bill payers' money, and that has been the case since privatisation. The illusion that private investment came into the businesses is a fake one. So they do need to put money in instead of just taking it out, because of what allows them to take dividends out every year. They've taken out outrageous amounts of money. Thames Water is now drowning under almost £19 billion of debt, for which we, the customer, pay about 33 pence in the pound to service. But the worst thing about that is that debt was never needed. That debt was just used to fund shareholder extractions. So all we need is for water companies to be taken into a proper focused business model that serves the public and doesn't serve investors. And these are often overseas investment funds with really no interest in the quality of our water, our environment, or the service, as they have proven.
And yet, Ash, it is true to say that investment performed by these water companies in England and Wales, I'm looking at the data here, I mean, throughout the 1980s, when these were nationalised companies, it was about £3 billion a year on average. Since privatisation, it's closer to £6 billion a year on average. I mean, they are spending more than they used to. It might not be enough, but I mean, this is not really about the ownership model.
No, it definitely is about the ownership model. Before privatisation, for the 10 years before privatisation, the government refused to let water companies invest. They squeezed that down to make it a soft target to be privatised. Then when it was privatised, there was a brief moment when money was injected into the business. But let's be really clear, that was bill payers' money. So instead of having it nationalised, which we say is a bad idea, it could be in public ownership where all of the money And as now the bill payers pay to a company, all that money goes in, as it does in Scotland, into the company, and it's spent on the business, it's on the staff. You saw on maybe that documentary how hard it is for Thames Water staff to try to work when they're so under-resourced. And it doesn't have to be sucked out to shareholders because they bring in no benefit whatsoever. And we could be doing so much better with our infrastructure.
Are we going to have to pay more for our water? I mean, if all this stuff needs doing.
Well, we wouldn't have to pay more for the water if we took the shareholder deficit out of it, because we would immediately, and if we could clear the debt from Thames Water, for example, we would.
Aren't the shareholders delivering important investment, though? I mean, aren't they quite crucial?
No, they're not.
Why do they exist then?
Great illusion. Exactly. That's exactly right.
No.
They buy a ticket to own part of the company, which they can then sell, and they do, and often make a profit on. And that equity never ever goes into the business. This would be the great thing to get across to the public, because it is that illusion that everyone thinks there's this investment. It's all bill payers' money. That's it. That's what we need.
But Ash, we have had incredibly low bills. All of the analysis that has been done over the course of the last 20 years, while we've had this current model of water company in England and Wales, what we've seen is a regulator asking the companies to keep bills down at every possible opportunity. Companies very often wanting to invest in new infrastructure, wanting to build new reservoirs. I mean, there's a very famous reservoir in Abingdon. I mean, we haven't built a new reservoir in England and Wales for the last 30 years. These water companies have been trying to do this, and we've had regulators standing in their way, stopping them from performing that necessary investment. I mean, this is less a problem of these water companies and more a problem of the government.
Well, I mean, that is what the water companies say, that they've been asking to do these things, but that's actually not true. Thames Water, for example, in 2024, for the last 5-year period, was funded to conduct over 800 schemes, and it failed to deliver on 112 of those schemes. It was given the money to do it. It didn't do it. Now, that the money that should have been spent on reservoirs that hasn't been spent. I think Abingdon, that's been a dragged on event because some people are in favour, some people are not.
Not just Abingdon, though, Ash. It's not just Abingdon. It's every single reservoir that private water companies have wanted to construct in this country. I mean, my goodness me, they've run campaigns trying to get these things built, and local government, and sometimes national government, says no and stops the construction.
I think if I'd like to see that evidence that we're talking about. That's not something that I've heard of before. What we have seen is a lot of corner cutting, and we have not got cheap bills relative to the rest of Europe. We're not as well off as people say. It's cheaper to buy water and sewerage in Scotland, which is in public ownership.
Could that be something about the population density and the number of locks that there are in Scotland? I mean, it's harder to provide water for a city of 10 million people like London.
There's not a free market, though, is there, in water? There's not a proper market. There's no functioning market because you have a complete monopoly, depending on where you live, right? And it's one by one company. If they were all competing for a better service, then maybe we'd have a better thing. It's probably the industry most ripe for nationalisation out of any of them, if you were going to.
But yet, as we've been discussing, when it was nationalised, the investment was lower because it's the government that has to decide to do the investment.
But there are many different factors. It's not like for like, is it always?
But Ash, I mean, you were saying for those 10 years before privatisation, the investment was low, and you're right. Is that not the case that when you are talking about a government has to think, do we spend the money on the schools? On the hospitals, on defence, or do we spend it on the water?
Yeah.
When it's a water company, their only concern is the water, and that's where the money goes.
No, it doesn't work like that. The bill payer funds a publicly owned company. It's not a question of, is it for the health service, is it for water, is it for something else? It's you pay your water bill and it goes into providing the service. It's nothing to do with the old-fashioned idea of nationalisation. That's not what Scotland is. And no one else in Europe does anything this foolish, because we have actually been the victim of a terrible scam. Thames Water's own evaluation report for the recent High Court case said, since privatisation, Thames Water has focused on extracting money for shareholders at the expense of doing the business, and has done it very expensively by doing things last minute and as a kind of patching up exercise.
Okay.
It's in their own independent report. It's a massive scam. It needs radical overhaul, and we could all be in a much happier place.
OK, well, we certainly do not want 3.6 million hours worth of manure or whatever sewage going into our rivers. Ash Smith, thank you very much indeed. You're the founder of Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. I mean, you can think that these businesses aren't doing, 100% of a good job, and also the government's not doing 100% of a good job. Of course, and the regulator.
Of course you can, but obviously these companies have to operate within the regulatory structure, and so often the government has been saying, or the regulator has been saying, that these companies can't charge more for a specific amount of infrastructure that they need to build.
But you take my point that you don't have a proper market. There's no real competition, is there, that you have in a way that you have with other supermarkets, or the way you have with car brands, or it'd be very difficult.
Well, you can have franchising and non-parallel competition, and if something is going very badly, it could lose its licence.
Yeah, because at the moment it's not really working, is it, with the environmental concerns anyway?
Right, we are still waiting for this press conference from the Prime Minister, which has been delayed for 10 minutes. So, in the meantime, why don't we turn to another issue? The European Union, rather, has landed a devastating blow on British technology. Yes, it's been a bit quiet this week, but despite the Prime Minister's promise in January that the UK, liberated from EU rules, will forge its own path on AI regulation, the EU is now set to impose its controversial AI Act in Northern Ireland. This matters because the red tape has already sent shockwaves through Europe, effectively slamming the brakes on the AI innovations that are going on in Europe. America's getting all of the pie.
I'm smiling because you did very well making it very exciting, but let's get our guest in, who can perhaps explain more. Former Conservative Special Advisor Fred de Fossard. Why should the average Brit care about this AI regulation then? Go on, tell us.
Great question, because it shows that the European Union wants to bring Britain back into its regulatory orbit every single day. They will use any policy, in this instance the Windsor Framework, as a ratchet effect, and that's exactly what they're doing here. What they have done is they have redefined the Windsor Framework protections on goods, because they think that Britain is a risk of smuggling dangerous goods into the European single market, and they have said that because AI is involved in things like the Internet of Things and iPhones and that sort of thing, that means that they have to apply the AI Act in Northern Ireland to protect against tech smuggling.
This is so important because we were all sold the Windsor Framework as this brilliant solution to Northern Ireland that would say, oh, this is OK because it won't affect services, which is 80% of our economy. But now Europe is sort of pushing the goalposts here. I'd say AI is a service, not a good, but they're calling what we would determine a service a good and therefore applying their regulations to it.
It's quite a dangerous precedent. I think it's potentially illegal under the Windsor Framework, as it is. So I would hope that the British government actually decides to challenge this and say that, no, the Windsor Framework's meant to be about goods and food regulation. It is not about tech. But as you said earlier, the EU has destroyed its own tech industry with things like the AI Act, the Digital Services Act and GDPR. It doesn't like having Britain and the United Kingdom next door potentially getting a more competitive advantage. So it will use what it can. It's a ratchet effect. And the thing is, if the government agrees to this, you know what they're thinking about with the EU reset, where they might realign with the European Union on goods regulations for the entire United Kingdom. Might they use the same definition here and say that all goods in the entire United Kingdom must follow the AI Act?
I mean, this is a pretty extraordinary hammer blow because Britain is the third largest AI sort of powerhouse in the world. I mean, Europe could take that away from us. Fred de Fossard, thanks so much for coming in and explaining that for us. I think it's an important story and one that is largely being missed.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, I should say that Fred de Fossard is from the Prosperity Institute, owned by the Legatum Group. The group is also one of the lead investors in the holding company of GB News.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Well, lots more coming up. We will be going to that press conference very shortly in Paris with the Prime Minister.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a blustery day in the north with outbreaks of rain and that rain is going to sink south. But before it gets to southern parts of the UK, still a few hours of fine weather to come during the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. A ridge of high pressure extends across the south, whilst low pressure passes to the north, sending a series of weather fronts in, and that's why we've seen this persistent rain arrive into western and northern Scotland. It's now spreading into Northern Ireland, Northern England, and then overnight much of the Midlands, Wales and the southwest will see that rain move through. It won't last long, but there could be some heavy bursts through the hours of darkness. The southeast, or at least the far southeast, stays dry with some clear spells. A little chilly ahead of the rain as it arrives in the morning, and also chilly behind the rain, but much brighter skies are moving in. So across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast, fairly grey and damp as we begin the day, but it is moving through, and the sunshine is already at this stage reappearing across the north and the west of England into Wales and much of Scotland. Northern Ireland also seeing some bright spells, but a fair number of showers are moving in as well. These showers will be lively with some hail and thunder for parts of western Scotland and some snow over the hills, because the air following the front is markedly cooler compared with the air ahead of it. By lunchtime, that front's moved through, so the sunshine reappears for the southeast of England, but it's not going to be quite as warm as it was on Thursday, with a bit more of a gusty breeze. Temperatures of 14 Celsius at best. More like 8 or 9 further north and west, with those showers coming through, and gusty winds, so feeling fairly unpleasant, I suspect, particularly for northern and western Scotland, where the showers will merge to form longer spells of rain at times. But they do tend to fade as we go into Friday night, and they become more restricted to the north on Saturday, with brighter weather in the south. That brighter weather becomes more extensive on Sunday morning.
A positive outlook through the night will power through to a bright day ahead. Boxed Home Battery Storage, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could have £17,777 in tax-free cash to play with this spring. Cash to spend on anything you like. And if that wasn't enough, we're also going to give you not one, but 2 sought-after designer watches and the latest Mulberry handbag. How would winning that sound? For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience, because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 2 o'clock and we're expecting Keir Starmer live in Paris for a press conference very, very imminently.
Yes, and joining us in the studio is our Home and Security editor, Mark White, to preview what we might expect during this press conference. The meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. What should be asked of the Prime Minister?
Well, there'll be lots of that will be asked of the Prime Minister, quite a lot of it probably from domestic journalists on issues around yesterday's spring statement. But we've just heard from Emmanuel Macron, actually, giving a news conference mostly in French. He's going to be appearing alongside Sir Keir Starmer, obviously, in that joint press conference, but he has given a single press conference to presumably his domestic audience and talking about the iteration of the UK and France leadership role in trying to figure out a way forward for Ukraine in terms of giving them the vital security guarantees that they need if any peace deal is finally hatched with Russia. This is something, of course, that Volodymyr Zelensky has spoken about at length. It got him into deep trouble, of course, in the White House when he continued to press...
Well, I'm told Keir Starmer's on his feet. Let's listen.
We've now convened 4 of these meetings in either London or Paris. And it's now, obviously, over 2 weeks since Ukraine agreed to an immediate 30-day ceasefire. That offer is still unanswered. It's over a week since Putin agreed to an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, but since then, Russia has hit energy infrastructure in cities across Ukraine. They've increased their bombardment, firing over 1,000 long-range drones at the country, hitting Ukrainian homes, schools and hospitals, with widespread civilian casualties. One drone killed a mother, a father and their daughter, an innocent family. Then this week we saw the agreement on a ceasefire in the Black Sea. I welcomed this as a vital first step forward, but within a few minutes of the announcement, Russia set out new conditions and delays. Now, President Trump has rightly called them out for dragging their feet. And we agreed here in Paris today that it's clear the Russians are filibustering. They are playing games and they're playing for time. It is a classic from the Putin playbook. But we can't let them drag this out while they continue prosecuting their illegal invasion. Instead, we should be setting a framework and a deadline of delivering real progress. And then we should hold them to that deadline. So here in Paris, we've agreed that we must go further now to support the peace process, support Ukraine, and increase the pressure on Russia to get serious. That means, first, stepping up the military pressure. So the Defence Secretary will chair the next Ukraine Defence Contact Group on the 11th of April to marshal more military aid and keep Ukraine in the fight. Because peace comes through strength. That was one of the main messages reasserted today and emphasised today all around the table and the meeting. Second, it means increasing the economic pressure on Russia, accelerating new, tougher sanctions, bearing down on Russia's energy revenues, and working together to make this pressure count. We also discussed how we can support the implementation of a full or partial ceasefire when it is in place, and how we can build on efforts towards negotiations on a just and lasting peace. That remains our shared goal, and it's what the Coalition of the Willing is designed to support. The political will from partners here today was clear. And this week in London, we hosted over 200 military planners from 30 countries coming forward with contributions on everything from logistics and command and control to deployments on land, on air and on sea. That work continues at pace. We will be ready to operationalise a peace deal whenever its precise shape turns out to be. And we will work together to ensure Ukraine's security so it can defend and deter against future attacks. This is Europe mobilising together behind the peace process on a scale that we haven't seen for decades. Backed by partners from around the world, we are determined to deliver a just and lasting peace, because we know that it is vital for Ukraine and Europe as a whole. And I am clear that it's also vital for Britain. Thank you. I will now take some questions. I've got a list here. I think we're starting with Adam from Sky. Adam.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Adam Parsons from Sky News. You talked there about political unity. Senior figures in the American administration have described European leaders, presumably including yourself, as pathetic freeloaders. How can you possibly rely on the Trump administration to craft a ceasefire that works for Europe and for Ukraine? And if they do create that, if there is a ceasefire, how will you enforce it and monitor it? And will you commit now to putting British troops on the ground in Ukraine to keep that country safe?
Well, let me begin answering that by describing the mood in the room today in the meeting, because we had 30 countries represented, obviously NATO and the EU as well. And there was a broad consensus that this group of nations is now stronger and broader than it's ever been. And so there was clearly a mood of that strength, a word that was used throughout the meeting. In terms of the military operational planning, that sits alongside the political momentum. So today and these meetings that Emmanuel Macron and I are hosting, that's the political momentum. Alongside that is the planning that's going on. It went on intensely in London this week, 3 extra days concluding today. And the Chiefs of Defence will now, as a result of today, the UK and the French and the German Chiefs of Defence will meet in Ukraine with their counterparts to take forward, as it were, with Ukraine, how those plans or options are going to be implemented. Obviously, we don't know yet whether there'll be a deal, what exactly the deal will be like, and therefore, politically, what we're requiring is options that are credible, that can be operationalised. But the Chiefs of Defence will now go and have that discussion, not least because the military and operational coalition, if you like, is designed to build on the Ukrainian capability, not sort of an alternative to it. So that's where we're at. As I've always said, this will require the engagement and support of the United States. That's a discussion we've had with the US, with the President, on many occasions. But I would describe the mood as a group of countries coming together, more resolute today and stronger and broader than they've been in the weeks that this has been developing as a group. Thank you very much. Harry, ITV.
Thank you very much. Harry Horton, ITV News. It's almost been a month since the first meeting of this coalition of the willing. And as you say, the fighting in Ukraine continues. It still seems as though the UK and France are the only countries publicly committing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine. And the US has still not committed to this security guarantee. What evidence have you got of any real progress that this coalition of the willing is making? And just if I may, you talked about setting a deadline. For what? And what happens if that deadline isn't met?
Well, let me take both parts of that. Firstly, on the progress, clearly there has been progress in terms of the numbers and the intent of the group and that sense of it being now a stronger and broader group brought together. And Emmanuel and I have now hosted, as I say, 4 meetings to bring this group together. And the mood today was very much a clear and resolute mood about the strength that comes from working together in this collective way. And of course, this is not a EU grouping. It's a broader grouping than that is now operating in this way. On the progress we've made, I mean, the planning, I went to see the planning myself on Thursday of last week. We had 200 planners in London in our own headquarters, split into groups that were dealing with the optionality when it comes to land, to sea and air, and now obviously the development of that through the Chiefs of Defence going to Ukraine. Yes, it's optionality. Nobody knows whether there'll be a deal or what the shape of it will be. But there's clearly been political progress in the sense of momentum, if you like, in the political group that we've been able to put together, which is significant in its own right, because there was a feeling around the table that Europe, taking Europe as a whole, has not been this strong and united for a very long time, and that was clearly the mood in the room. But in the operational planning that goes with it, I'm so sorry, Harry. The second bit of your question.
You said there was a deadline.
Oh, sorry.
What is the deadline?
Yeah. So the point here is, as it were, a preliminary point to a deal, which is. Our collective view is that Russia is playing games, that Putin is back to his old playbook, and therefore the pressure needs to go on to Russia to get more seriously to the negotiating table and to have a framework or a deadline, if you like, for responding to what the Ukrainians have already put on the table and what the US is seeking to achieve in their initiative. So I think there's got to be a framework around that. Obviously, we'll discuss that with allies and with the US, but also, and this was a very strong resolve across the room, that now is not the time for pulling back or weakening on sanctions. On the contrary, now is the time for increasing sanctions on Russia to get them to the table to these negotiations, to the hope of a ceasefire and a lasting and secure a ceasefire that preserves the security and sovereignty of Ukraine. So that's as it were, the other element of the meeting today. So up until now, very much a focus on how do we defend a deal if we get there. Today, an equal emphasis, I would say, on how do we collectively, as a pretty large group of nations, ensure that we put pressure on the Russians to get to the table, to actually negotiate and be really clear that they are filibustering, they are delaying, and we've seen this playbook before. Look, I mean, we in the mood for deadlines. I don't want to put a hard deadline on this, but we need to see this developing in days and weeks, not months and months, and we need to move on to that space. But I mean, so I'd say today was that came up, as it were, alongside what we need to do if there is a deal, as part of the big discussion that we had over quite a session this morning. Jeremy from BBC.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Prime Minister. You seem to be describing a very different world or different view of the war to the one that President Trump tells us about. I mean, this is all happening, isn't it? This talk of ceasefires because of President Trump's, first of all, his assertion during the campaign that he could sort it all out in a day. Then it was going to be 100 days. He was a great deal maker. That actually there is a reality here that neither side believed there could be a ceasefire, neither Ukraine nor Russia, that President Putin has made it clear on multiple occasions that actually his view of what should happen is not a ceasefire, but it is either victory through capitulation of Ukraine or victory on the battlefield. Isn't it time, in fact, to actually say, this isn't going to work? We shouldn't be going for a ceasefire. We should be going for something else, maybe more military support for Ukraine that will enable them to make progress on that battle.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that President Trump absolutely clearly wants a lasting peace in Ukraine, and that's directing all of his actions, and in a matter of weeks he has got both sides, as it were, to a negotiating table, and we've made some progress. Ukraine has clearly put forward 2 weeks ago now its proposal in relation to a ceasefire. What we now need to do, in my view, is increase the pressure on Russia to get to that proposal on a ceasefire, to meet it and to match it as a first step towards a lasting peace. And I think that's the right course, and that's why we are supporting the US in this endeavour, and that is amongst the things we discussed this morning. And at the same time, we have to answer the question, if there's a deal this time, why will it hold in the way that the deals in the past have not held? Because this wouldn't be the first time that a deal has been reached, but what we need to make sure is it's the last time that a deal is reached and not breached and is held to. So that's why we're focusing on pushing forward and put pressure on Russia and answering the question, how would you defend a deal if a deal is in place? And I genuinely believe that is the right course. Everybody wants lasting peace. Everyone wants a negotiated settlement, not least the Ukrainians. They've been subjected to this illegal invasion for over 3 years now. They've been incredibly resilient. Zelensky has led from the front, in my view, over all of those 3 years, and he's now leading from the front again in relation to these ceasefire discussions. Thank you.
Follow up on that, Prime Minister. What makes you so certain, then, that there is a way of persuading President Putin to give up his long-held and very publicly discussed views on the future of Ukraine, which he believes should effectively be part of Russia?
Well, nobody could stand here and I'm not going to say with great certainty, by date X, we will have got to this point. What I am saying is that this is a process. I believe the goal is the right goal, which is a lasting peace in Ukraine that secures the security and sovereignty of Ukraine. I am not alone in that view, because that is the President Trump's view. It's clearly the view of a group of countries now that we've put together, 30 countries, openly saying amongst themselves this morning that this is the strongest they've seen Europe in a very long time. And they mean Europe and not institutions within Europe. And it is, of course, the view of Ukraine. So I can't stand here with certainty and say, yes, I know exactly what the outcome will be on what day. What I do know is that that politically, if we can provide that leadership, backed up by operational plans, then that is the best chance, in my view, of achieving the outcome that we all want. Chris, GB News.
Chris Hope, GBNews. Prime Minister, Russia's today warning of a direct conflict with NATO if your coalition, the Willing, puts troops on the ground in Ukraine. Will you give MPs a vote on your plans before that happens? And if I can quickly ask about the spring statement yesterday, you told us that we'll be £500 better off from the spring statement, but just next week, energy bills go up, council tax bills go up, water bills, broadband bills, TV licence, rail fares go up, plus national insurance for employers, plus fees of income tax thresholds. £500 won't touch the sides of what's facing your voters next week. Are you gaslighting them? And what's your message to them about the cost of living crisis?
Let me take I think ended up being 3 parts of your question, Chris, but fair enough. Look, in terms of what Russia says, we know what Russia wants. It wants a defenceless Ukraine. So it doesn't surprise me that Russia's saying their position is Ukraine shouldn't have any capability of its own or any assistance or help from anybody else. That rather gives away their opening stance on this, and that can't guide us in our response. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves with a vote because we're not at that stage. We are at the stage of turning the political momentum into operational plans, looking at the various options, and then going for the next piece of work with the Chiefs of Defence. But you know my long-standing position, which is if we were to deploy in any scenario on a long-term basis, then of course Parliament should have a say in that, and I don't deflect from that. Look, on the people being £500 better off, it's not me saying that, it's the OBR. And that is really important because we said that we would improve living standards, under a Labour government, and that is what the OBR says we are doing. And obviously their calculation takes into account other factors. That is materially different to the last 14 years. If there's one thing above all else that singles out the last 14 years under the Tory government, it's that it was the biggest downgrading and reduction in living standards in generations. So that is really important. And of course, alongside that, interest rates are coming down. If people are on mortgages, that makes a material difference. Wages are up higher than prices. So in terms of what people feel in their pockets, that's a really important measure. And of course, for those on the lowest income, that's 3 million people, they will have that hike in the minimum wage. So what we're doing is, in answer to your question, securing our economy, taking the decisions that are necessary, seeing that impacted in the OBR's assessment that people will be £500 better off, so living standards will go up, very important. But at the same time, because of the investment we made in the NHS and others, we've seen 2 million additional appointments in the NHS. We said we would do that in the first year of a Labour government. We've done it in 7 months. For 5 months, waiting lists have come down, even during the winter. So I think we can be clear that the decisions we made in the budget were the right decisions. They were tough, but they were right, and you can see now some of the effects of them. Thank you very much, Chris. I've got Ulysses, I think, next.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
Bonjour.
French television, BFM TV. Emmanuel Macron just said that you are going to co-pilot the military support for Ukraine, and you announced that there will be a mission in Ukraine with the British and French Minister, maybe of Defense. So are you the co-pilots with Emmanuel Macron of what's being done to reassure Ukraine of the support of the European nation? And also, Emmanuel Macron this morning again explained how he sees this force of reassurance, this European force. So how would you describe this force? What is it going to do if it happens? Macron spoke about, sending troops around big cities and around military bases, strategic bases. How many military do you see joining this force, and how many countries would participate? Thank you.
Well, this morning the group of countries asked Emmanuel and me to sort of lead the coordination of the efforts that we have touched on this morning. Now, that is obviously something we do in conjunction with and in liaising with all of our partners at every level. But it's really just to take that effort forward and then to take it into the next stages, the Chief of Defence meeting that will be happening in Ukraine, and to ensure that we keep the momentum going in the group that we've been able to put together. But let me just be really clear. This is a group of countries that are coming together in this way because each and every country represented, each and every leader is taking that leadership role at a crucial moment. And in a sense, I would say collectively, rather than I wouldn't focus on individuals, I wouldn't focus on Emmanuel or myself, I would say as a group, we are answering the question, which was, should and can Europe step up, to which the collectively is, yes we should, yes we can, and yes we are stepping up. And that's why I think the mood was of a stronger group and a broader group this morning. On the way in which the one aspect of this would work, and I say one aspect because there was a broader sense this morning that this is of course about Ukraine, but it is also about the future of security and defence in Europe more generally. And that's why the mood was very upbeat and determined. And in relation to Ukraine, I would describe this force as one. I mean, the first thing is we need to make sure the Ukrainian capability is as strong as possible. It has to be built on that. There's this idea of a porcupine strategy, which is making sure that Ukraine is in the strongest position. They've got an incredible fighting force now. They've got 3 years' experience in conflict on the front line. So building that capability, maintaining and building on it, but also putting this, I would say, I say coalition of the willing, I mean, this is a force designed to deter in order to send that message to Putin that this is a deal that is going to be defended. That's, I suppose, the best description of it. We're familiar with that, obviously, in other countries in Europe, but that is done in the recognition that we also need US involvement in that. Thank you very much. I've got Kieran from Guardian.
You didn't say how many countries are willing to do and how many soldiers you think this force would be.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Some figures like 30,000.
Yeah, so we've had 30 countries at the planning meetings. Different countries are putting forward different capabilities in terms of where they are able to contribute, and that's why we've broken this down into different planning scenarios, land, sea and air. But many countries are coming forward. I won't go into all the plans for reasons you'll understand, but when you've got 200 planners from 30 countries who are there voluntarily, that nobody can force them to be there. They've come along to be part of this, to say what capability they're prepared to put forward, which is a good thing. And some might have said months ago we wouldn't have got that far, but we are making progress. Thank you. Sorry, Kieran.
Yeah. Thank you. Kieran Stacey from The Guardian. Overnight, President Trump announced his intention to impose 25% tariffs on cars and car parts coming into the US. Did he give you any notice of that? Does that make you pessimistic about the chance of signing a US-UK trade deal? And what happens if that trade deal doesn't come about and we do get hit by these tariffs?
Well, look, I think the tariffs are very concerning. There's no doubt about that. And I'm really clear in my mind that the sector, the industry, does not want a trade war. And that's why, first and foremost, we've got to work with the sector, work with industry in our response in relation to this. I think we need to keep, as ever, pragmatic and clear-eyed. We are engaged, as you know, in intense discussions with the US on economic arrangements on a number of fronts, but including to mitigate tariffs. And we'll continue in that way because I think that rather than jumping into a trade war, it is better pragmatically to come to an agreed way forward on this if we can, and that's why we're intensely engaging in the way that we are. But look, we always have to put the national interest first, and that's why I've also been clear that as we engage in those negotiations, those discussions, we will keep all options on the table. The industry doesn't want a trade war, but it's important that we keep all options on the table. But I'm working hard with others to make progress on economic arrangements, which I hope will better serve our country than a trade war, which will not, in my view. Thank you. Bruno from The Times.
You said that this was about defending a deal, having a force but designed to deter. We know the Russians don't like it. We've also heard from Trump's envoy talking to the Russians who described talk of it as posturing and posing. So it doesn't sound as if the US is very likely to be there. And on the European side, despite all this unity, if you want to do a security and defence pact with the EU, you'll first have to do a deal on fishing, on catch quotas for cod, herring and scallops. Surely that's just insane in this period.
Well, look, firstly, to take that in stages, I don't doubt that Russia doesn't want the deal defended. because an undefended deal is in their interest. That's what happened last time, and look what they did. So I don't pause for long on that particular point. On the US, look, we're talking to the US all the time at almost every level, including NSA level. I speak to the president regularly. And it is really important that we continue to do so, working with the US, being clear about what we're achieving. And look, there's very broad consensus in the US that Europe could and should step up, and actually, that is what we are doing, and that is in our interests. It's in the interests of the US, and it's in the interest of defence and security in Europe. And look, I'm going to resist your temptation to start talking about fish, because I don't think a running commentary has helped in the past on any of these matters. And I'm clear in my own mind that whether it's in relation to the work that we're doing today on a broader defence and security, frankly, because we're talking about defence and security of Europe as a whole, or on the question of a defence and security pact with the EU and the broader reset, which of course we're working on as well. I think it's right that we do that in an orderly way. But I think it's fair to say that relations with our European partners are very much stronger now than they've been for some considerable period. And that is a good thing for the defence and security of Europe, in my view. Thank you very much. I've got David from Mail.
Thank you. Sorry, just to press you on fish, can you give us some clarity about whether you'd potentially sort of be willing to continue the status quo on fishing rights beyond 2026 in return for a defence and security deal? And again, are you not disappointed that fishing rights is being sort of weaponised in this way and put on the table? Shouldn't it be taken off when talking about security and defence? And just on the spring statement, Paul Johnson has said today that there's a very good chance that your government is going to have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the autumn, suggesting that pensioners and the wealthy could be targeted next. He's right, isn't he? And shouldn't pensioners in Middle England be worried?
Well, let me take that in stages, alongside what we're doing today, which is not to do with the EU reset. It's obviously a broader question of broader country.
Well, that was the Prime Minister speaking live in Paris following a meeting of the so-called coalition of the willing, those European countries willing to defend any peace agreement that is signed between Ukraine and Russia. If you're interested in watching the rest of that press conference live, we're continuing to broadcast it over it on the GBN2 channel on YouTube. You can find that at YouTube by searching GBN2 or by scanning this code on your screen with your phone or tablet right now.
But if you're sticking with us here, we're joined now by GBNews Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, he moved quite swiftly to questions from the press, including from our political editor.
Yes, he did. And I think there's some key lines to have come out of both the Stammer press conference there and the press conference from Emmanuel Macron as well, just before Sir Keir Stammer's news conference. And that is on this force, this peacekeeping force we've been describing it as, but they've gone back to this reassurance force description that you remember came out in the early days when they were talking about getting potential peacekeepers on the ground. Emmanuel Macron again branding it a reassurance force and actually giving a bit more detail than what Keir Starmer was giving there in that news conference about how this might operate. He said that the troops that would go into Ukraine would not go onto the contact line, so in other words, the front line of the fighting, but instead would be held back in key strategic locations. But then I would ask the question, for what? As a reassurance, apparently, but so what? A deterrence that if something happens on the contact line, they then move up to support?
Or could it be that they're around critical national infrastructure, energy production that the Russians have targeted in the past, for example?
Well, it's certainly possible, but then do they get involved directly in defending those areas of critical national infrastructure from attack from the Russians. That's not come out as yet. Other key lines, I think, that really, I think, set the Europeans a bit further back from where we are in terms of the rhetoric coming from the White House was what Sir Keir Starmer was saying there, accusing the Russians of filibustering, saying that this has now been 2 weeks since Ukraine agreed to that peace deal that Donald Trump had proposed.
The month-long ceasefire.
That was going to allow for a sort of a cessation of the hostilities out, temporary cessation of the hostilities out in the Black Sea and also around critical national infrastructure. But he said in those 2 weeks, Russia has continued to target Ukraine's infrastructure, is classically, as I say, filibustering. And on the issue that Russia has been calling for, because Russia has said that it is, in principle, willing to sign up to this ceasefire as well, but it wants to see a relaxation of some of the sanctions. Well, on that, Sir Keir Starmer's just said, no, that we don't think this is the time to loosen up any of the sanctions. In fact, he says, it's a time to tighten the sanctions as Russia continues to target these areas of critical national infrastructure.
It does speak to the trouble that the Russian economy is in. They specifically want a number of their banks to be readmitted into the SWIFT payment system to allow for international payments, international transfers of money that has been so frozen off from the Russians over the last 3 years. This, I suppose, points to something that we don't often hear in the press in the UK, that actually the Russian economy is really hurting. It's running on fumes. It's only propped up by military spending. I mean, to some extent, at what point does the West call Putin's bluff here?
Well, we got an indication of that as well from Sir Keir Starmer, who said that this whole process in offering the 1 month ceasefire deal to the Russians shouldn't go on much longer. He said days and weeks rather than months before we just decide that that's an end to it, and we need then to go full-throated into boosting Ukraine's capability to be able to resist Russia. Well, that might be the express hope and wish of many around the table today in Paris, but I'm not sure that that would be the outlook and the express wish of those in the White House. You might see a situation that if any of the current peace negotiations collapse, that the US decide, well, that's it, we're going back to where we were, where we're freezing all military support for Ukraine. And then we're left with a situation where Europe really has to put its money where its mouth is and step up the military support that it is offering Ukraine. Now, we heard from Keir Starmer again in that press conference talking about the mood of the summit, of those that were gathered there, as being stronger and more resolute than he's seen at any gathering of those 30-odd countries that support Ukraine in its fight against Russia. But will they really, all of them, be willing to put very significant additional funds towards military support for Ukraine if we get to the point where President Trump and his White House decide to pull back?
Yes, there's a difference, isn't there, between turning up at a meeting in Paris and saying that you're willing to support an ally on the continent and then actually putting the money and potentially the troops behind it too. As it stands, is it only France and the United Kingdom who have gone as far as to say that they will have troops?
Yeah, well, I was going on to answer
Sorry.
that. No, I'm saying that's the perfect question, because that's what I was going to get to, was the fact that Sir Keir Starmer was asked that very point about, you're talking about how strong and resolute those are at this summit, but which countries so far have agreed to put effectively boots on the ground? Because we only hear that France and Britain are willing to do that. And he pretty much dodged that question. He wouldn't go there. He said that there are a range of capabilities that countries were willing to support. Interestingly, Emmanuel Macron, in his news conference, did say, look, some of those supporters of Ukraine are not willing to get involved in the sort of peacekeeping or reassurance side of it. But quite who is willing to put boots on the ground, we don't know. We only know the UK and France are willing to do that.
And he won't be drawn on the issue that Christopher raised of whether there would be a vote in the British Parliament over troops on the ground.
He said it's too early to get into that at this point. One final point that actually I think is worth highlighting as well. He confirmed there that defence chiefs from the UK and France are going to go out to Ukraine to start planning for this reassurance force. That's going to go down well in the Kremlin, I'm sure, but that's going to happen in the coming days, we're told.
Well, keep a close eye on that. And Mark White, thank you very much indeed for that summary of goings-on in Paris.
Yes, in other news, perhaps good news, no more soup on paintings, no more roadblocks, no more annoying stunts. Yes, Just Stop Oil has announced it's ending its headline-grabbing protests, but they will have a final march set for April the 26th.
Well, the group claims victory in its fight against new oil and gas projects, but says it's planning a new strategy for future activism.
OK, well, joining us is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, Dr Bing Jones. Dr Bing, thank you very much. So what's this all about, then? I must say, we've been a little bit sceptical this afternoon that suddenly Just Stop Oil are going to dramatically change their tactics.
Yeah, well, hi there. Thanks for letting me talk to your listeners again. Try to get over a bit of the truth rather than, like your last person was talking about, dodging the question. It's mostly dodging the question of the climate. But look, Just Stop Oil is a lot of people. We're ordinary people. I'm an old man. I'm a grandpa. I'm a doctor.
You're not ordinary, though, are you, Dr Bing?
I'm just very frightened about the fact that we're not dealing with the truth. And we're not going to go away. And we've had a lot of success. I mean, you guys like to slag us off all the time. But I've been on your programme, I think, 3 times in the last week. So we have a lot of success.
Oh, have you?
We've got 90% name recognition. We've kept 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground. We've, since we started, it's our main aim, which was to stop new oil and gas, is now government policy.
So you've won then, Dr Bing. Everything's fine and rosy. But I do want to ask you this one question. We're looking here at some of the stunts that have been performed, not just in the last few years that you've been around, but in the last 8 months, since the 4th of July, since the new government got in. Now, when the new government got in, their policy from day one was no new oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. Their policy from day one was concrete up shale gas wells onshore in the United Kingdom too. Why then did you continue to desecrate the grave of Charles Darwin, to throw paint over buildings and paintings? Why did you continue to do this over the last 8 months when the government has not changed position?
This is nonsense. Basically, we've not desecrated any graves at all. We've splashed a little bit of paint about.
Oh, come on. I wouldn't like it if someone did that to my grave or a relative.
Look, come on. We're looking here. Please, you guys, we're looking at the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced.
I'm not taking lectures from Phoebe Plummer. OK, I'm sorry. If you expect me to, Dr Bing Jones, then, you know, I've got something to sell you. That is not... No one's going to be taking lectures from a silly little girl, in my view.
Well, you can slag people off.
No, it's not about slagging people off.
I'm not going to call you a silly little girl.
You can if you like.
Because you're in a position of responsibility. You have the responsibility to tell the truth to your listeners. And the fact is that the government is failing. We've changed our demand from the success, which was no new oil and gas in the UK, to the need for an international treaty to stop all oil.
Let's stay on the facts here, because I really do appreciate that you want to stay in a fact-based conversation, and I really appreciate that. Yeah. So why then In the very month that two of your most prominent activists were put away in prison for the next few years, why is this the month that you choose to change tactics? You claim that it's because you've won a policy victory. The government hasn't changed policy. The policy's been the same over the last 8 months. Yeah. I put it to you that you've changed tactics because your biggest agitators are now behind bars.
No, that's not the case. As I say, we're a group of people. And you could actually lock us all up and a load more people would appear again. The fact is that the real problem...
But you claim the government has changed policy. It hasn't.
Look, the big problem is the fact that we live in a society that's run by billionaires for billionaires. This TV programme here loses £100 million. And I'm sure many of your listeners would love to have a little bit of a dib of that, but your billionaire backers want you to tell propaganda, and the propaganda is that everything's okay.
Maybe some people just disagree with you.
I'm here to tell you everything's not okay.
Maybe some
people
just disagree
know
with you.
it. They know that things are not okay. And
I think the people who watch and listen to this programme will have heard a direct question about what has changed in government policy, and they'll have heard you obfuscate, talk about billionaires, talk about how other people would, of course, go out and protest. The one thing that has changed in relation to your organisation this month, the month you decide to change your tactics, is that a number of your activists are now in prison. I mean, surely the lesson from this isn't that you've changed government policy, because you haven't. Policy's been the same for 8 months. What has changed is that you guys have been locked up. That's a lesson for all of us.
The fact is that people are in prison. That's a sign that the government and the media, particularly you guys in the media, are anxious. You're frightened. You don't want to hear the truth. And the truth is that our government is failing, massively failing. Emissions are continuing to rise throughout the world, and that has dire consequences for your children. I don't know why you guys aren't more upset, because your children are going to pay a terrific price. Every scientist in the world who's not paid by the fossil fuel industry agrees. We're in deep trouble, and you guys are continuously trying to avoid the issue. So don't worry, because Just Stop Oil will be back. We'll be back in a different guise.
Well, you're a member of other groups, aren't you, Bing? You're a member You're a member of all of these types of groups, aren't you? Extinction Rebellion.
I've
probably Animal Rebellion. Any of the others?
I have. Look, I'm desperate. Please, you two, can you just understand? I'm an old man. I've got 4 children and 6 grandchildren. I'm frightened for them.
Yeah.
And your listeners are frightened as well.
So it's strange that you've changed your tactics, because you were just as passionate a month ago and willing to go and spray paint everything, and now you're not. Dr. Bing, thanks for coming on. We will have you back and continue this conversation, I'm sure, when next Just Stop Oil pops up in whatever form it does. Dr. Bing Jones there.
And if you're in search of some spring sun, here's the forecast for the top European holiday destinations.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations forecast.
Heavy showers and thunderstorms moving their way eastwards across Europe, affecting regions around the Adriatic Sea. But there is some sunshine in places. The odd shower affecting Madeira and Tenerife. But after all the heavy rain from the beginning of March, Portugal, Spain seeing a much better week with plenty of sunshine on offer. But moving our way eastwards, these are going to be where we see those heavy showers and thunderstorms affecting the Adriatic Sea coasts and also Greece. But we'll see a steady improvement as we head into next week, but the best of the temperatures across Tenerife.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations forecast.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another fine day for southern parts of the country, but it is turning increasingly wet and blustery further north as a number of weather fronts come south associated with this area of low pressure. So a more unsettled phase, albeit relatively short-lived, across northern parts of the country during the rest of Thursday. It is going to turn increasingly wet then for much of Scotland, but especially for western and northern Scotland, the rain pushing into Northern Ireland during the afternoon as well. The winds picking up, some strong wind gusts, particularly around coasts and hills. So feeding on the cool side because of the unsettled weather arriving. But further south, plenty of fine weather for England and Wales away from western hills, and some decent sunshine in the southeast with another warm day expected. But as we go into the evening, this is when the wettest weather arrives into the central belt. The wind's picking up as well, so an unpleasant end to the day. Northern Ireland, outbreaks of rain on and off, and there will be some drier weather, but a lot of cloud. The rain just about pushing into Cumbria at this stage. Wales seeing a lot of cloud cover and a few spots of rain over the hills, but staying clear for much of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. However, this unsettled weather in the north is sinking southeast overnight. It's going to be turning increasingly wet for northern and western England as well as Wales during the early hours. The rain will be relatively short-lived as it moves through, but there could be some heavy bursts during the hours of darkness. And, of course, with the rain, it's going to stay mild in the south, although colder air is arriving into northern parts of the country with blustery showers following and some snow on the hills of Scotland. And we start off Friday with that rain clearing the southeast, and by lunchtime I think it's out of the way, with brighter skies returning to all, a mix of sunny spells and showers, feeling much cooler, particularly for northern parts of the country where the wind will be gusty, and temperatures will reach 9 to 11 Celsius.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, should we cross to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who was at the press conference with the Prime Minister in Paris. Christopher, tell us what you asked, remind us what you asked the Prime Minister.
Yes, well, before I asked the question, it was lots of chat about the summary of this 4th meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, 30 countries trying to support Ukraine in a peace deal yet to be agreed. In fact, we haven't even got a ceasefire agreed with Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. The PM said that they're stronger and broader than there's ever been before. The 3 days of military planning just ended in London. 200 different military officials. The mood is clear and resolute, he told us. I thought the biggest thing for me from the Q&A there with the PM about Ukraine was him to say Parliament will get a say before UK troops are deployed on the ground. We've heard that from the other main leaders, Nigel Farage for Reform, Ed Davey Lib Dems and Kevin Baynott from the Tories, but now the government is saying Parliament will get a say before deploying UK troops in Ukraine. That is so important to give what may happen later this year a democratic mandate. But I wanted to ask for GB News viewers a different question also about the spring statement. I know many viewers and listeners are worried about next week when we're going to see big increases in council tax, water bills, broadband, TV licence, rail fares, national insurance, of course, 2% on that, and also income tax thresholds being frozen. I wanted to know how on earth £500 a year could touch the scale of the bills facing many of our viewers and listeners next week. And here's what the PM had to say moments ago.
In answer to your question, securing our economy, taking the decisions that are necessary, seeing that impacted in the OBR's assessment that people will be £500 better off, so living standards will go up, very important. But at the same time, because of the investment we made, in the NHS and others, we've seen 2 million additional appointments in the NHS. We said we would do that in the first year of a Labour government. We've done it in 7 months. For 5 months, waiting lists have come down, even during the winter. So I think we can be clear that the decisions we made in the budget were the right decisions. They were tough, but they were right, and you can see now some of the effects of them.
The PM there not really answering the question, focusing instead on spending on the NHS and the minimum wage increase next week. So big worries, I think, for so many viewers and listeners about the cost of living crisis next week. Awful April starts next week.
Listing those bills. listing all of those bills that are going up, up, up. Thank you very much, Christopher Hope. We'll leave you in Paris for now.
Very sunny Paris.
It is very sunny, although it's actually cooler in Paris. A couple of degrees cooler than it is here.
It's always better in Britain. Well, don't go anywhere. Of course, that's it from Good Afternoon Britain today. But there is much more to discuss. Many more options for you to digest with the one and only Martin Daubney. He's coming up from, of course, 3 until 6 o'clock. He's next.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a blustery day in the north with outbreaks of rain, and that rain is going to sink south. But before it gets to southern parts of the UK, still a few hours of fine weather to come during the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. A ridge of high pressure extends across the south whilst low pressure passes to the north, sending a series of weather fronts in, and that's why we've seen this persistent rain arrive into western and northern Scotland. It's now spreading into Northern Ireland, Northern England, and then overnight much of the Midlands, Wales and the southwest will see that rain move through. It won't last long, but there could be some heavy bursts through the hours of darkness. The southeast, or at least the far southeast, stays dry with some clear spells. A little chilly ahead of the rain as it arrives in the morning, and also chilly behind the rain, but much brighter skies are moving in. So across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast, fairly grey and damp as we begin the day, but it is moving through, and the sunshine is already at this stage reappearing across the north and the west of England into Wales and much of Scotland. Northern Ireland also seeing some bright spells, but a fair number of showers are moving in as well. These showers will be lively with some hail and thunder for parts of western Scotland and some snow over the hills because the air following the front is markedly cooler compared with the air ahead of it. By lunchtime, that front's moved through, so the sunshine reappears for the southeast of England, but it's not going to be quite as warm as it was on Thursday, with a bit more of a gusty breeze. Temperatures of 14 Celsius at best. More like 8 or 9 further north and west with those showers coming through and gusty winds, so feeling fairly unpleasant, I suspect, particularly for northern and western Scotland, where the showers will merge to form longer spells of rain at times. But they do tend to fade as we go into Friday night, and they become more restricted to the north on Saturday with brighter weather in the south. That brighter weather becomes more extensive on Sunday morning.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's just 2 weeks left to see how you could be a spring winner, as we have an incredible £17,777 in tax-free cash to be won. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also give you the latest Mulberry handbag and not 1, but 2 sought-after designer watches. Make sure you don't miss out, as lines close on the 4th of April. For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
It's all kicking off in the world of bowling, because an historic bowls club could be forced to close after a staggering 2,000% parking fee hike. Members, many of them of course elderly, say they can't afford the jump from 40 quid to an astonishing £840. Now, for some, the club is their social lifeline, but the council insists that the change is necessary to ease financial pressures. Well, of course they would. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the club captain of Eastbourne Parade